Barely sat down.
Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome to Friday, an early edition of Heavy Metallurgy. This is episode number 43. Alan, welcome. How are you today?
Doing all right. I am glad this day is over, and that's all we will say about that. So now we can do something fun, talk some metal with folks, see who shows up in the chat, and bring on a guest that we've been working on arranging to appear for a while now, and we finally got schedules aligned so that we can. So I'm really excited to have him aboard this evening.
Yeah, we've got Andy from Cloudy Milder YouTube channel. Definitely, if you have not seen it, have a look. I put a link in the description to his channel. He's stationed in Scotland. Well, we don't have talking about him. Let's bring him on. Andy, how's it going?
Hey, how you doing?
Good.
I'm good. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thank you for coming. And you're stationed in Scotland, so that is why we're going early today. And thank you for everybody that's hanging with us today on the earlier time zone. It might freak some people out, but we definitely are going to probably be doing this more as we try to accommodate more people from overseas. And
yep. Yeah,
well,
we didn't want Andy to stay up till 3 o'clock just to get this thing started. So that would not.
You say early. It is 11 o'clock here. It's an hour till tomorrow. So we're going to kind of finish this in 2 different days. It'll be Saturday when I finish, I think, and Friday for you.
We had Jürgen on our normal time, but he's an all-nighter diehard guy, so I don't think he stopped drinking until the next day late. Yeah, so
he's proper metal, Jürgen.
Yeah, I can't hang with that anymore. I just can't do it.
Yeah, and when let's see, Simon from Explosive Action was on, but he's so far ahead in time zones that he's actually ends up being behind us by 2 hours. But it's the next day.
The next day, yeah.
Because so it's actually it's only 5 o'clock in the afternoon here, but it's already Saturday afternoon, so that worked out okay. But yeah, I'm glad we got everything worked out and arranged. I was just telling folks, Andy, that we've been working on getting you aboard for an episode for a while, and so yeah. Awesome that you're here.
And our topic of discussion today, we are going to discuss, we've obviously, England at one point tried to rule a good chunk of the world, and that didn't work out so well for it. But nowadays, you look back, it isn't just metal music. If you look at Gothic, it's got some of the most influential bands in Gothic. It's got traditional heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal, some of the most influential bands ever. Even pop music. I mean, like Duran Duran. I know it's Alan's favorite topic to bring up on the show, but again, they're bands that started out early and set a tone in the genre that they were professionals in, and they still have a career today. So not only is England very prone to creating or offering bands that are influential, that they're long lasting. They go the test of time, whether it's Motorhead, Maiden, Judas Priest, you name it. But we're here today and we thought we'd talk about that. Anybody have anything else further to throw into that ring?
Just a general question, and I'll start with the preamble. Apologies ahead of time. If Marty and I do stumble over our British geography a little bit.
Yeah, that was my bad.
Yeah, it's not always our strongest suit. So if we accidentally refer to a band who's technically from maybe Scotland, but they were English or something like that, not trying to mess anything up on purpose. It's just not our strongest suit. But yeah, Marty makes a good point with bands from that whole scene have been, at the center of most major musical, sort of revolutions going back at least to the British invasion and the Beatles in the 1960s. And obviously, we maybe have a different perspective on that, not being there at ground zero. But Andy, what's sort of the local take on having so many very influential bands and so many very long-lasting genres, come out of a relatively small geographic area?
Well, that's I think that's the most interesting thing. The UK is small, a small landmass, but the population is quite. It's quite packed together. The urban areas are not that far apart, so you'll get big cities like Liverpool and Manchester that are maybe an hour away, and the accents are completely different. The culture is slightly different. The outlook on life is slightly different. You've got London, you've got Birmingham, then you're up in Scotland, Glasgow, Edinburgh. And even the difference between Glasgow and Edinburgh, again, that's a 40-minute drive away. It's a completely different accent. It's a completely different, take on life with the people that live there. So it's
Mark.
Yeah, I've lived in I lived in Wales for 18 years. I lived in England for 18 years. I'm now in Scotland for about 15 years or so. And I'm probably older than that. I don't think that adds up to my age, but there's just such a diverse culture here, as I say, in such a small geography, that it's not surprising really that all these different styles of music have come about and really taken off.
I will say, correct me if I'm wrong. I mean, English or United Kingdom bands, very influential, but one genre in particular that I think has been strangely, how do I say this? I don't want to be mean about this, but I don't think the English thrash scene really planted its flag in the world metal sphere like it did like the Bay Area thrash or Germany or you name it really. I mean, don't get me wrong, UK threw out some amazing thrash bands, but they just did not have the same PR team. I don't know what it is, but I've got a few things in here that I think are essential thrash, but when it comes down to super influential, they seem like they were late to the party, or they just did not have the marketing behind them to get into the public eye. They were on the wrong kind of label. I mean, it's just, which is funny because Noise International did have a station in England for a while, and they were signing some English bands here and there. But I mean, what do you guys think of that? I mean, it might be different for Andy because I mean, he shows. I mean, his channel on Cloudy Milder shows a lot of thrash bands from England that I typically don't hear. Yeah. But a lot of you guys show and talk very fondly of Acid Rain, which they always struck me as pizza thrash, and that it just never really stuck with me.
I didn't give Acid Rain any credit at all when they first came out. To me, they were a joke thrash band, and then there were bands like Lawnmower Death as well.
Yeah,
we'll go and just release another album. So I kind of looked at it as it wasn't a scene. I wasn't really immersed in it back in the 80s. It was all the US thrash scene for me. But I mean, I've delved into it more in the last few years, and really sort of there are some gems out there, but it was late to the party. A lot of it was influenced by the Bay Area thrash, the Big Four, those kind of bands coming through. This is me and some of the guys here do that Contact in Blood, and that's obviously where we've taken the inspiration from. This is Ian Glasper's book, and this is all UK thrash metal. It's one of those reference books where each band gets a page or so, and there are hundreds of them, and it's all divided up regionally across England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, and all the counties there. So there are a lot of bands, and there are some gems out there. My UK thrash collection's ballooned over the last few years, but over and over again, the stories in that book, as they talk to the bands, are they didn't really get any backing. They were a bit late to the party. So whereas thrash was really kind of kicking off in the mid 80s, a lot of these bands weren't getting deals or minor deals until sort of 80, 88, 89 maybe, and thrash was already on the wane, and they weren't getting the backing. A lot of the bands were signed, so when they brought the US bands over here, they'd have someone to tour with, so they didn't have to bring two bands over. They'd have an opening act. And so you get a lot of US bands that would come over to the UK. They would tour with one or two of the local bands, and then the US bands would go on to Europe, and the record companies wouldn't send the UK bands to Europe either as well. They'd be like, thanks, you've done your job, and then they'll go and also go into Europe because it was just the cost associated with it. So they didn't really get the backing, and they were just too late. But what I would say is there's a lot of UK bands that influenced thrash in the first place, if not started it. So I think we've got a foothold in there somewhere.
Yeah. I would agree with that.
Yeah, something I've always kind of assumed, Andy, and again, my perspective may be out of whack, not being there geographically. It kind of seemed in a way that the British scene just skipped thrash a little bit. That, obviously, the new wave of British heavy metal movement was a thing. But, as that was winding down, you already had bands like Napalm Death and, Bolt Thrower and stuff coming out. And, like through the US or German scene, you can kind of trace a line from, 70s bands to new wave of British heavy metal inspired bands to thrash bands to death bands, etc. But, when you already had, Scum and, In Battle There Is No Law coming out, you kind of just had a more extreme form, and there wasn't much room for thrash in between. That if people were wanting, traditional stuff, well, they were going to listen to Iron Maiden and Judas Priest. And if they wanted the kind of new cutting edge, heaviest stuff, why would you listen to Virus when you've got this, on the shelf already, beating them to the punch? Do you think is there anything to that, or is that just me having a weird skewed perspective?
I think there is. I mean, I think that's a big factor in there. But I mean, thrash was an American thing, and it was really popular. I mean, don't get me wrong, it wasn't the thrash wasn't popular in here, but people wanted, the US bands. I mean, I was all over Anthrax and Metallica in the mid '80s, and I saw them numerous times. Certainly, Anthrax saw them numerous times, and it was that sound, and it captured it, and everything else just seemed a little bit copycat. And I say it wasn't that well publicized. I mean, I looking back through, old copies of Kerrang and Metal Hammer, that was my only window really into what was happening in the world. Obviously, no internet. You always have the old guys on saying there was no internet back then. That's our excuse for not knowing anything. And
yeah,
but the magazines didn't even really promote them. A lot of the UK bands had poor reviews because as soon as they released something, they were instantly compared to their US counterparts, and they weren't really given a chance in terms of they weren't looked at in their own right as being a great a great band in their own right. It was they're always compared to either one of the big four or something. So it's always like this is a band like Anthrax. This will be a band like Metallica. This is your Megadeth. This is a Slayer. So they weren't really held up and promoted as this is a great band. Have a listen to them.
Yeah, and I've read some interviews with some of the members of Virus, for example, and they make all those same points that every time an American band came over, they were asked to open for them, but they never got to go tour anywhere else. It was always just be the opener when Megadeth stops through, and that they kind of constantly were just compared. She's like, well, you sound an awful lot like Metallica. I'm like, well, we can sound kind of like Metallica, I guess. Maybe.
Well, a lot of bands did, and they were openly influenced by them. I mean, bands like Slammer were openly influenced by Metallica. They were one of the better UK thrash bands.
Well, Deathwish is another one that was pretty. Here, I got it. I might as well show it. These guys are very Metallica leaning. I thought. I mean, this is a solid thrash album. I think this is their second, isn't it? I do not have the first one. Oh, this is the first one. I don't know. I don't remember. But great stuff. I mean, England, and you talk about bands that were late to the party. I mean, you look at Earache Records. What was Earache Records doing? Signing a lot of crust and hardcore that went into grind. But then you've got early on the band Hellbastard. They were very thrashy. They were on Earache Records. They did that Unnatural Order album. And I remember buying that and getting it, and it just seemed out of place on that label. It seemed late, very late, and very tired sounding. And it's funny now. Go ahead.
So I think I saw a comment pop up. Someone said the UK went straight from punk to grindcore or something like that. And a lot of UK thrash bands were actually born out of punk bands. And they already had a fan base. And some of them were smart and they reformed under a different name. And some of them carried on with the same name. And then they completely destroyed their fan base pretty much because people went, it's not punk anymore. I don't want to hear this. This is metal. And then some of them went back and it was, I think of, I meant to pull out that one, but I can't remember the name of the band now. But I think even Hellbastard were a punk band to start with.
I think they were too. They got a lot thrashier as they went along. The thing that really blows me away is especially watching you guys' channel between you and Mike and Mark and Scott. You know, I've seen a lot more Acid Rain. I've seen like you guys showing Virus records. I mean, I had Force Recon back in the day, and I thought that album was super boring. I mean, it just came at a time in a there was so many better thrash bands, and that album, it seemed okay. It just seemed okay. Meh.
I appreciate that a lot more now.
I see. I need to revisit it now that you guys have shown it, and I need to dig that out and give it another shot. Yeah.
Marty, have you heard their first one?
I have not.
Force Recon is the second. Pray for War.
I've only heard Force. I own Force Recon. That's the only one.
Okay. Yeah, I thought Pray for War. You hear that more punky edge. They were one of the bands, like Andy mentioned, that came from a punk background, and Force Recon does suffer just a little bit from that kind of, like we were talking, the sounds a little bit like Metallica, but yeah, Pray for War still has like a really cool vibe to it. It's got a real Mad Max post-apocalyptic thing going on with the lyrics and the imagery that works really nicely too. Kind of carries over from their punks days.
And they're still
you might like that album a little bit more than Force Recon because it is noticeably different in the delivery.
They're still going, you said, Andy?
They're still going. Yeah, I saw. I think it's only Coke Finley is the. He was. I don't think he was a rich. I don't think he played on that first album, but he was certainly on Force Recon. And I went to see them on the 30th anniversary of Force Recon a few years ago, and they're still going. They had an album out a couple of years ago, but I've not got around to picking that one up yet. It's all self-released, so it's pretty expensive.
Well, should we jump into this? You want to start showing some stuff? I think we'll start with you, Andy. You're the guest. You go first, and I'll follow up in the end here.
Well, if we're talking about influential bands, and this is one I wasn't expecting to be shown, but I have jumped into them big time literally in the last 3 weeks, and that's Budgie. And I've heard so many people talking about Budgie being an influential heavy metal band, and obviously, lots of people know Budgie because the same way that lots of people know Diamond Head because of Metallica.
Yeah,
they covered Bread Fan and Crash Course in Brain Surgery, and I remember checking them out in the same way that I didn't really know much about Diamond Head when Metallica started covering them, and like a lot of people, I just really rediscovered them again through Metallica. And I also did the same thing with Budgie, but it didn't click. And I was sent this and another CD recently, and I've just started going back some of the early back catalogue and reading up a little bit about them and the number of bands that actually call out Budgie as being an influence. I mean, Maiden certainly one, but also if you look back at you talk about covers, Van Halen have covered Budgie, Megadeth have covered Budgie, Metallica, Iron Maiden have covered Budgie as well. I think it was I Can't See My Feelings was on the B side of From Here to Eternity. So and I was listening to the album. It's a 1974 album called In for the Kill, and the track on their Zoom Club that has, albeit slower, it has the Iron Maiden chug in there, and it really sort of like stood out to me now. And that's a really good album. And it has its slow moments, but it also has some cracking, absolutely brilliant tracks on it. So I've sort of dived in recently and learned a bit more of probably the most damning thing is that they are from my hometown of Cardiff. So I grew up in Wales, within the UK. Cardiff's the capital city, and Budgie are from Cardiff, but I never really got around to checking them out. And it's one of those things that you're not too old to. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, Soundgarden cover them as well. You're not really too old to actually go back and check out, because for me, I was born in the early 70s, but I didn't get into music until around 84. And I used to look back at all the 70s stuff, especially with so much music being released in the 80s in the metal, and it was all brand new. It was all the new wave of British heavy metal was kind of coming to an end, but there was so many influences of bands. I would go back and look at things like Black Sabbath, Deep Purple, UFO, and these bands to me it was dad metal back then. It was dad music back then. and a Budgie were just lumped in with that as far as I was concerned. So I didn't have that heavy metal education. I didn't have that older brother or that group of mates that was into metal. It was everything that I found out. I had to find out myself because I was the only one in my group that was really into metal. So I'm spending a bit more time now actually going back into the 70s, and a Budgie. They kind of call them the Welsh Rush because they're a power trio.
Yeah.
But I think that's a bit harsh because they actually had, by the time Rush released their first album in 74, Budgie already had 3 albums out. They were doing it before Rush, but they also have a bit of a Black Sabbath feel to them as well. So if you've not heard them before, the earlier stuff is definitely a kind of a mixture between Rush and Black Sabbath.
And we are, I think, the same age. You just turned 50. I turned 51 in June, so you're riding on my coattails. Us old bastards.
I'm 51 now myself. So.
Oh, you are? Oh, yeah. Right on. Well, you beat me then.
Just gone about a month ago.
Yeah, Budgie's. Yeah, that's a great one to start with tonight, Andy. And I'm kind of in the same boat as yourself. I've spent more time in recent years working back through some of these 70s bands. Haven't got through all of them, of course. There's tons of stuff there, but yeah, Budgie's one that I've been checking out more and more albums by. And you're right, a lot of heavy metal bands owe a great deal to Budgie. David Mustaine, in particular, has always mentioned them as one of his big influences. His famous story was that he got picked up while hitchhiking in California. And when talking to the guy that picked him up, he's like, "Oh, your guitarist." He's like, "Hey, you ever heard of Budgie?" Dave was just like, "What? Who? Some 70s band?" And the guy's just like, "Check this shit out." And had played Bread Fan, and Mustaine just lost his shit there while hitchhiking with the guy. But yeah, and like you said, their albums, they've got some real bangers on them. But like a lot of 70s bands, the albums tend to be very varied. It's not going to be all fist pumping, foot stomping, tunes from start to finish. For every Bread Fan, you'll also get. They had slower songs. They had bluesy songs. They had songs that were very much meant to be tongue in cheek and would have sort of goofy titles sometimes. Which again, you saw that kind of variation was very normal for heavy bands in the early and mid 70s. Even American bands and other scenes did the same thing. Mountain album could have something heavy like Mississippi Queen, and then it could have like this 8-minute, Sergio Leone like soundtrack, with on side B. And I think that's something that hurts Budgie a little bit is when people look back at those albums. If you're looking for something that's just solid heavy metal, none of those albums really fit the bill. But if you're interested in sort of a little more diverse balance on an album, those early ones, you're right, are really, really good. The thing I was showing albums from, there's a box set with 3 discs in it.
I have just bought that
one. Okay. Yeah. This has it's albums 3, 4, and 5, I believe. And at least albums 3 and 4, Never Turn Your Back on a Friend and In for the Kill, are very, very good. The 5th one, Bandoliers, didn't hit me the right way at first, but it's a good glimpse if folks are interested in checking out Budgie. This is a nice budget way to do it. It's a 3 CD box set, nice little booklet, and it's like $19 on eBay or Amazon. You can get it for the price of a little more than what you pay for one regular new release CD. So
it seems like they're kind of in the era, though. You could go into a record show and find their records old and partied on pretty cheap, I would think.
Maybe. I think, unfortunately, even Budgie has kind of gotten to the point where the albums are more expensive. I know the first album is now a pretty tough one to get a copy of for less than 70. I've seen it priced like $75, $100 more recently, and it's a good album. There's some really heavy tracks on it. That first album does lean a little bit more towards the Black Sabbath heaviness, like you mentioned.
They are pretty heavy for the 70s.
Yes, they are
very heavy for the 70s. As you say, not every single track.
They're heavy when they want to be, and they're less heavy when they don't want to be. But and that was kind of the thing.
I was reading that entry in the International Encyclopedia of Hard Rock and Heavy Metal from 1983, and 82 was actually I think their last. I know they re-released one where they reformed in 2000s, but their last sort of mainstream album was in '82, and this album was still questioning the fact that why haven't they quite made it yet, and the best is still to come, and then they didn't release another album for 25 years.
Yep. And unfortunately, Shelley Burke passed away just a few months ago. It's not been, I guess it was the tail end of 21.
Yeah.
So yeah, he's no longer with us at this point. But yeah, very cool band to start us out with, and one that I think, a lot of people may pass on because of the quirky name and some of the quirky titles and stuff. But there is a lot of good music. You may have to sit through a few songs here and there that you're not into, but there's cool stuff to be heard on those early Budgie albums.
Okay, Alan, you're up.
Okay. Well, I am going to start with, one of the, if we're talking sort of very iconic and influential bands, but I'm going to start with one that I think should be at the top of the list, and it's this band. I don't think you can really talk heavy metal at all without talking Judas Priest. I kind of went back and forth. Did I want to start with Priest or Maiden? And I decided on Priest. I'm going to put Priest a peg higher than Maiden in terms of influence and impact for a simple reason. Without Judas Priest, you can question whether Iron Maiden ever is able to develop and get over the top the way they did. These guys were around and they built the template while Steve Harris was still, slogging around, changing out band members every other month. Mm-hmm. Black Sabbath is always going to be thought of as, the inventors of heavy metal. Okay, there's some discussion that you can have there. Priest is really the band though that takes that 70s amorphous heavy metal sound and really tightens it and streamlines it and focuses it and turns it into heavy metal that became world dominating in the 1980s. There's a lot of that on this album, but this album still has other flourishes to it. You have songs that sound they lean towards Queen and stuff, but you also have songs that they're really defining the twin guitar attack that's going to take over. But then you get to like 78, 79, and you start hitting with this the live album. Yes, it's not live, it doesn't matter because it kicks so much ass. And these are the albums that really, everything from this show, the aesthetic of this is how people are going to dress now if they're into heavy metal. This is how bands are going to play now if they want to be a heavy metal band. They set the tone for heavy metal moving into the 1980s and for the new wave of British heavy metal. So I think you've got to start with Priest. It's a little funny. I think Priest sometimes gets a little bit maligned because they have been uneven over time. They have some albums that are better than others. They went through their sort of party phase in the mid 80s, but they still come back from time to time and put out a real killer of a heavy album. They had Painkiller in the early 90s. Even just in the past few years, they had Firepower. Is this an original album? No. Does it sound like a lot of other Priest albums that came before it? Yes. Does it still kick a whole lot of ass? Yeah, it kind of does.
Still need to get it. I've been every time I see it in the store, it's $40. I'm not gonna.
Yeah, no, don't pay that for it. It's a little too. They could have culled a few songs and stuff, sure, but that album has a lot of oomph to it. So it's this band. Didn't completely disappear from the map. During some of those Demolition and some of those bad albums that came out around the turn of the century. Priest is still a huge thing, and heavy metal owes a ton to that band. They owe just as much to Judas Priest as they do to Black Sabbath. That's my take on Priest, so that's why I'm starting with them.
Agreed. Oh, and before I get into my pick, I do want to say that one of our viewers, Kyle, contacted me yesterday saying that he was going to make the devil's dish and wanted to know the ingredients and what we needed for green bean casserole. So
if you told him potato chips, you're wrong.
I told him
that comes from my wife. That comes from her. So if you're going to argue the potato chip thing, you've got to talk to the missus.
I just told him how my mom makes it, and then I told him to look up some recipes. So just so you know, we're influencing people's culinary choices. That's very important when it comes to this. But for me, we might as well start early on, and this band is very influential. There's no denying it. They're still slogging about as two different entities, which is kind of sad, but both of them are pretty decent. We're talking about Venom. There's Welcome to Hell. This came out in 1981. This is a neat copy, but it's also Bass Records from Bologna.
Oh.
Bologna. Yeah. I don't even know what pressing this is, but I got it for $2.99, whatever the hell it was. But Venom, though they coined the phrase black metal, they really have little to do with second wave black metal. And being a young guy listening to this stuff, I never thought of this as black metal. I just thought of this as thrash, heavy metal, whatever. At the time I was into it, they're probably the most popular and probably the sloppiest band ever. They're Abaddon or Abaddon, however you say his name, is probably one of the worst drummers ever, but somehow it all worked. I mean, you watch the Seven Dates of Hell video, and his timing is like this. He's got no meter. It's like all over the place, but I love it. They practice that way. It works. One iconic band photo too, by the way, so iconic. But you're looking at Welcome to Hell, Schizo, Poison, great song. Live Like an Angel, Die Like a Devil. I mean, this is their first album, and the fact that they were lumped into the new wave of British heavy metal category, they sounded nothing like what was going on in new wave of British heavy metal, in my opinion anyway. They always seem like the odd man out on those comps. But when it comes to dirty, dark, and evil, heavy metal, England was on the cusp of the satanic panic. They threw out some albums that were scary at the time. And, even though this is all tongue in cheek, and you go back and you listen to it now, and the seriousness level is obviously not there, but you listen to it as a younger guy, and the shit seemed pretty serious at the time and a lot of fun. It's, a good mix of crushing metal and a little bit of punk. And England, I think, is, at least as I show some of the stuff I've got tonight, there's a lot of punk influence in English metal. And I think it's a good thing. I think it sets it apart from the rest of the world. And we'll get into that more as we get going into it. But yeah, I'm starting out with Venom.
Okay. Andy, a question for you. Was there like a big satanic panic thing in the UK surrounding bands like Venom, or was that just an issue we had on this side of the pond?
Not at all. I mean, there was, which I think is why there are so few, and I'm sticking my neck out here because I think there's so few UK Christian metal bands, because there wasn't a need to counteract what was going on. Maybe it's because the Church of England that we have here, or the Roman Catholic Church that we have here, is just a bit more chilled when it came to that. I realized it was just sort of music, and and I think, for the case of my parents, so I grew up in a church-going household, and we went every week. And my parents thought the heavy metal was just rubbish because it was noise, and they couldn't understand the words. And that's probably because they couldn't understand the words. They didn't know what the words were about. And they weren't bothered either. They just thought it was a phase I'd go through and grow out of. And so when I was playing, playing things like the Number of the Beast and all these things which were causing so much panic elsewhere, certainly in the US, because I used to read about it in the magazines over here about records getting burnt and all sorts, and it was a lot more chilled out. I don't think people could really be bothered over here to get that worked up about it.
Were folks like Marty said, a part of the problem was folks over here didn't get that it was meant to be very tongue-in-cheek, that they looked at like the lyrics on a Venom record, and they literally thought it was these people were like eating babies in the basement.
Well, it was that, and their photo shoots. I mean, they spent a lot of time composing their photos, and there's something about English romanticism, the dark side of that. It's like Hammer horror. You think of all these other things. It just seemed like those bands, it felt more real. The evil felt more ancient because, we're a product of over there. America is not the same time frame that Europe in that, as far as, you know.
Yeah, but we had the Captain and Tennille, and that's pretty fucking evil right there.
Yeah. But you know what I mean? There was just a different, I mean, as a young kid looking at this stuff, I mean, like Merciful Fate from Denmark, that shit was so evil, and it didn't sound like it came from here, you know.
Well, it's one thing with kids. I mean, yes, they're going to look at, you know, if you want to impress kids, all you got to do is say a few dirty words and Satan, and you're going to get a reaction. But yeah, it sounds like, you know, with just, you know, the adult population over here, you know, lost their minds over it too. And yeah, from Andy saying that, yeah, they were just a lot more chill about it. So I'm thinking that the joke was just kind of completely lost. Americans, we have that problem. We sometimes are much too literal, and we don't get when somebody is goofing around or not goofing around. But yeah, Venom's a great pick for sure, Marty. If nothing else, they did two things. They spawned, you know, an entire genre that reinvented itself and has, you know, continued to do really well. And they also showed that, yeah, the point I just made, they showed that you could be very successful embracing the whole occult taboo and just running with it. Because that stuff had been levied at heavy metal bands for a decade before Venom came along. Black Sabbath dealt with all that crap. Led Zeppelin dealt with all that crap. You know, all those bands, you know, had, you know, the witchcraft and the, you know, the blackness and stuff. And a lot of those bands really tried to skirt it or kind of keep it at arm's length a little bit. And Venom was just like, you know, all in on that shit. It's just like, you want evil, you got it. And they showed that there could be very successful. And you've had 1,000 bands since then just take that same aesthetic of, we'll just be as overtly crazy, over the top satanic as we can. And those bands almost always get a following. That it's a product that will sell.
You mentioned there that obviously Venom launched a whole genre. Is there any other band though that's launched a genre that they sounded nothing like? Because they're not black metal. They have just had the album black metal.
Yeah.
They to me they're closer to new wave of British heavy metal than they are to black metal. Yet they spawned, and they're you know, they're given the credit for spawning the whole black metal genre pretty much.
No, that's a good point, Andy. And it's a problem I have with how first wave black metal is described. The only thing that unites those bands that are put under that first wave of black metal banner is the satanic presentation. Musically, they sound, Merciful Fate sounds nothing like Venom, and they sound nothing like Hellhammer, and they sound nothing like, you know, the first Running Wild album or the first Destruction album or the first Bathory album. Those bands all quickly established their own identities completely. The only thing that lumps them together is the lyric. It's basically just like Christian metal. Christian metal bands are only put together because, you know, of the lyrical topics. They don't sound any, you know, Mortification sounds nothing like Stryper, who sounds nothing like Deliverance or Exalt or, you know, name 100 other bands.
It's the
So you're absolutely right, Andy. It's a weird phenomenon that they kind of launch.
The whole Christian metal thing is a whole genre that every genre is defined by the sound of the music, but Christian metal is defined by the lyrics.
Yep. Yeah, and first wave 80s black metal kind of has the same issue. Those bands.
Well, Christian metal molded their whole thing. Yeah, their lyrics made them Christian metal, but their sound, they copied popular bands from other genres of the evil genres to try to sell the message. Good or bad, that's what they did. That's what they did.
For some bands, they did that. You know, not all of them, I don't think.
Not all of them. No, not all of them. That was a generalization. But I mean, you walk into a Christian store and you look. If you like Metallica, you will like Tourniquet, or if you like King Diamond, you will like Tourniquet, or whatever.
They did push those Tourniquet albums pretty hard for a while there.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, Believer, and Mortification were the big the spear. The point of the spear for that whole thing for sure. But anyway, Andy's back
with the spear analogy there, Marty.
Yeah.
And some Christian symbolism there.
As soon as it came out of my mouth, I realized that what I was saying. Yeah.
Well, okay. I'm gonna go there. I'm gonna go with one of the most obvious ones, and certainly one of my favorite bands. And I'm glad you didn't take it from me, Alan, when you with your choice. But I'm gonna go the Maiden route.
All right.
Just because it's difficult to find. So the whole new wave of traditional heavy metal movement that's not really new anymore. It's been going longer than the whole new wave of British heavy metal movement lasted. Just about every band will cite Iron Maiden as being an influence, and certainly a lot of bands in the 80s would cite Iron Maiden as being an influence. But to me, there's two kinds of, and I'm not going to go into Iron Maiden because everybody knows Iron Maiden, and you guys have covered it extensively. But I pulled up two albums because what I think is there's two Iron Maidens. Mm-hmm. There's bands that were influenced by the Di'Anno era style, and there were bands that were influenced by the early Dickinson style. And I grabbed a couple, and these are both UK bands as well to keep it on topic. So I've got bands like Toledo Steel, are band from Southampton in the UK. They're very much, to me, in the Dickinson camp. Even the singer has, he kind of models himself on Dickinson. And then you've got a band like Seven Sisters, and these are one of my favourite UK traditional metal bands at the moment. They're from the, not so much the Di'Anno vocals, but from the tone of the guitars and the way it's produced, has more of a sort of, probably more of a Killers feel to it than Iron Maiden. But they're both bands that are heavily influenced by Maiden. But
I'm writing Seven Sisters down because I've never heard of them. Seven Sisters.
Oh, they've just they released a new album. They've got 3 albums out now in total, and they're one of those bands that have just clicked with me. Absolutely superb. But they're kind of carving out their own niche as well. They're not a clone of anybody. Vocals, some people have questions, sort of saying that can't really get into them, but I think they're different, and I like things that are a bit different because it's all been done before.
Oh, it has, yeah.
But even with Maiden, there are bands that are complete clones. There's a band called Monument. I don't think they're going anymore, but they've had about 3 or 4 albums. They're a UK band as well, and they are. You listen to it and you think, right, that riff's from that song, that solo's from that song. The vocals sound like Dickinson as well. But they have had such an impact musically across the board, and of course they were influenced themselves by other UK bands like like Purple, Yes, UFO, Budgie. So that you've got a band that was heavily influenced by the 70s heavy metal, influencing bands coming from the for the next 30, 40 years, and still as well. They're one of those bands that everybody knows, everybody likes, even if they don't like the Dickinson era, or even if they don't like the Di'Anno era or the Bailey era. There's usually some era that somebody likes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Andy. Judas Priest may be the band that had the biggest influence on the future of heavy metal, but Iron Maiden has spawned more bands that followed in their wake than probably any other 3 metal bands put together. So many 80s bands, you're just like, what's your influence? Iron Maiden. And you see that in hundreds and hundreds of interviews with different bands. Everyone cites Iron Maiden as a big thing, which speaks to their popularity and their impact. Some of that, of course, is they were making great albums. Some of that also is, it shouldn't be overlooked, the touring cycles that these bands did, that both Priest and Maiden did very big extensive tours repeatedly in the United States in the early 80s. So they were touring other territories. Fans were coming out and seeing it, and going home and just like, okay, time to start an army. I want to do that. I want to do what those guys just did, and just lift an entire generation of bands in their wakes, just that were influenced by, especially like those albums that you showed. I think those are the big ones that captured people's imagination, whether they heard the album or saw the tour. You couldn't count all the bands that followed after those Iron Maiden albums. It would be impossible.
And you mentioned Priest, and there's always been the Priest camp and the Maiden camp. I was always Maiden guy until later in life, but Maiden overall have been a lot more consistent and sticking to their guns, where Priest, they had the bluesy albums, they had, the straight up metal anthem albums, they had the weird 80s hair metal phase. They went in all sorts of, they kind of went wherever the winds of popularity blew them as far as their style. Whereas I think that's what might set Maiden, and why more people may gravitate towards Maiden, is just for the consistency of it. Yeah, I mean, they changed to Blaze Bailey, and that was kind of a step backwards for a minute, but they got back on track.
Yeah, I mean, we won't go deep, but yeah, they went through their changes too. You had, the more proggy albums there in the mid '80s.
Yeah.
You had a couple of, less than stellar returns to form right around the, turn of the '90s. Yeah, you had, whatever the hell Virtual 11 is. I don't know what to call that mess. So yeah, but in general, I think you're right. They didn't have as wide a swing in style as Priest did.
Yeah. Going back to Priest. So I thought, so you've mentioned there, you showed quite a lot of influential albums from their 70s period, but I thought Priest didn't really make an impact in the US until Screaming for Vengeance came out. I thought that was their breakthrough album.
I think you're right. For really becoming a huge force overseas, British Steel and Screaming for Vengeance were the two that really started to make them into arena rock star level status.
Because those 2 or 3 albums you showed from the 70s, I completely agree, they influenced a lot going into the new wave of British heavy metal. But I think after that, Priest moved a little bit more from being the influencer to being influenced. I mean, things like British Steel, they kind of slowed down a bit to fit in with new wave of British heavy metal, I thought. And then Turbo was kind of, people are playing synth guitars, we better do that as well. And then even Painkiller was a bit like, everything's harder and thrashier, we better do that now. So I think they kind of changed, and that's where I think people, you say they negative comments about them is they did become a little bit reactionary, but they were certainly initially started off the movements that followed.
Yeah, you're right, those are good points. And part of it with Priest too, it's easy sometimes for any grumpy heavy metal fan to sit back and armchair quarterback changes in musical style. I know I've read quotes from the band members about that. Yeah, like you said, there's a big shift between those late '70s albums and like British Steel, Point of Entry. They get a lot simpler. They're definitely more accessible songs, and it's easy to say, oh yeah, they were. And you're not saying this, but people will sometimes say, oh yeah, they were hopping on the MTV bandwagon and stuff. The band members made the point of, we were fucking starving because we weren't selling any albums when we were, Stained Class today, 40 years later, is considered an essential classic. At the time, it was considered a disappointment in terms of sales. The band, was slogging along, making album after album, and not making much headway. They were not becoming rock stars off of Sin After Sin. They were not, they were not an arena rock champion level band based on Sad Wings of Destiny. It was when they changed styles a little bit, and then connected with sort of, the 80s zeitgeist that all of a sudden they elevated. So, that change in style was, in a way, essential to their survival.
Absolutely. Do you know what? I'm kind of glad they did, because I absolutely love these Priests. I love Turbo. I'm sticking my neck out there. I'm losing.
I like it too. I just bought it on tape recently, and it holds up okay for me.
Turbo's okay. Yeah, it's got some very good songs on it. It has a few that are a little cringeworthy, but it's got some good stuff on it.
Out in the Cold is a great song.
The songs on Priest Live where they played it live. But it has less of the keyboards on there, and it's a raw sound. And the songs hold up as good heavy metal songs in their own right.
Yeah. The track list on Priest Live is just it's a strange selection of songs to have put out as this kind of shorter live album in the first place. But that's a topic for another night. But yeah, Iron Maiden. Is it fair to say at this point Iron Maiden is the most popular heavy metal band in history? Do we want to go there? Make a
Oh,
difference?
easy.
Probably, yeah.
I don't think there's very little. Maybe Metallica.
Metallica and Black Sabbath might be the only names off the top of my head that I think most people, easily rank Priest a little lower. Oh, that was something else, Marty, you mentioned that I wanted to ask Andy about. So I wasn't aware of it growing up, but Marty's right that for a lot of folks there was this Priest versus Maiden kind of choose your football team mentality. Was that a thing in the UK also, that if people were Priest fans they ignored Maiden, and vice versa, or not so much?
Do you know what? I don't know. As I mentioned early on, I was kind of a loner in my music taste. So I didn't go to the school of heavy metal. I didn't have, let's say, the older brother saying, this is Black Sabbath, you must listen to this. This is Deep Purple, and then listen to this UFO album, and this will give you everything you need to understand where the music came from. I just basically went for what I've heard, and I'd heard Priest and Maiden, and to me they were just two great bands. I didn't even think about there being this competitive rivalry. Now maybe some people did when they're in a group of friends and they're constantly baiting each other, and I don't have that album. So it may well have done between groups as friends, maybe as banter, maybe on a more serious note, but for me it was just two great bands.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm in the same boat. It never occurred to me that I was supposed to sort of pull for one over the other, but like yourself, I didn't have a ton of sources of information for heavy metal when I got started. But yeah, regardless, two great bands that have done a great musical legacy. Absolutely.
Well, Alex here says Metallica are bigger, much bigger. The album sales are night and day, and concert sizes too. Maiden only sell equal to Metallica overseas.
Is Metallica even a heavy metal band at this point, though?
They are. They've had their moments, but they are. They are. They are. Are they a great heavy metal band? No. Are they what they used to be? No.
I don't know.
The fact that they're huge. They're still huge. It's amazing how huge they got.
Yeah, and I have no problem with the band being successful, but Metallica became successful by really watering their sound down in a commercial-friendly direction, which we don't need to go down that rabbit hole either. But I have issues of whether or not you call Metallica consistent. If people complain about Judas Priest getting into a little bit more of a party mentality for a couple albums in the 80s, Metallica has spent decades playing radio pop music, so that can be thrown right back at Metallica. But if folks want to list them as bigger, okay, we can fight that another night.
Their bank accounts, though, aren't they? It worked for them.
What'd you say?
What do they care? They're multimillionaires now because they.
Oh Lord, yeah. We can call them post-industrial ska music, and it doesn't change the fact that they have enough money to buy an entire fleet of islands.
Well, Jason Newsted, I saw an interview a long time ago, him saying that the royalties he makes off of the Black Album alone, he never has to work again. He doesn't have to do shit. And they just reissued that here last year. They put out that massive box set, and it's to put out one album that's so enormous that you don't ever have to work again, and your kids will probably have money for the rest of their lives type of thing, that's fucking huge. It's huge. And I think the Black Album has been on the charts about as long as Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon is what I've heard. I don't know. But anyway, that's not England. So Alan, you're up.
But you're right, Marty. It is impressive when a band can generate that particular kind of hysteria. Leppard for a minute.
No. Oh no. Out of all the Def Leppard, that's the one that fucking pops up.
Hey, it fit the flow of the thing. And Def Leppard, hey, I got my hysteria joke in. You're not taking that away from me. But no, definitely Leppard. Obviously, now, you're getting into much sort of lighter, more commercial-friendly waters. But this is a band that did originate among the new wave of British heavy metal bands, and just by luck, talent, correct alignment of the stars, whatever combination of factors, they rapidly catapulted themselves to the front of that. in terms of popularity and sales. And the first album's a lot of Def Leppard's one of those bands that if you're a certain age, you only know of them as this, bad Hairspray band from the late 80s. But if you're a little bit older, you remember that they made an EP that had some really ripping new wave of British heavy metal tracks on it, and that some of those songs made it onto the first album, onto the night, into the night, on through the night. Hysteria and Pyromania are not their first albums. They had 2 albums before that are more AC/DC influenced, and were a big new wave of British heavy metal act. They just rapidly managed to accelerate away from that in a different direction that, again, we can laugh and joke about it all we want. Let's get rock horrible. But once again, these guys, this one album alone means that, these guys, could, have bought and sold, half the kingdom if they'd wanted to. And it has a huge impact, whether we, it's probably not any of our favorite albums, but the influence this has on hard rock and heavy metal there in the middle of the 1980s is huge, because that's right where you start to see bands moving forward from like the release of that and Welcome to the Jungle. There was very little traditional heavy metal still in the spotlight. That bands either went in the heavier direction, following Metallica's lead, or they went into the Hairspray direction, following Def Leppard and Guns N' Roses' lead. Everybody in the middle started to get lost in the mix really, really fast at that point. One video from this, which one? Pour Some Sugar on Me, was #1 on MTV's daily video thing for something like 59 days, 79 days, weeks. I mean, just months and months in a row. The numbers on it were absolutely staggering. There's something like 6 top 10 singles off of this one album. And again, the band already had achieved a lot before that album. Pyromania had done quite well. High and Dry had done quite well. This was a band that was already on a huge upward trajectory. They were already, fairly big rock stars before you even got to Hysteria. So obviously that style of music fell out of vogue. Heavy metal, moved on. It's, a style today that, a lot of us are just like, no, let's not go there. But if we're talking about influential, big, iconic, heavy bands from the UK, you've got to at least mention Def Leppard. They had a huge impact at the time. They don't have the kind of true metal legacy we think of, but you can't write them off just because you don't want to hear Let's Get Rocked Again.
Well, the thing of it is, the first 3, I love the first 3. And Pyromania, when I was in grade school, was huge. And if you look at it, it in a lot of ways is like the Appetite of Destruction of its era. I mean, a perfect rock album. It's a perfect hard rock album. It Photograph, the whole damn album is really solid. And High and Dry is a solid album. You can't take it away from Def Leppard. They were there, and they swung into more commercial pastures, but I don't see that band as going the heavier side. They went the direction they went to, and they're still doing it. Again, longevity,
They didn't want to be associated with heavy metal, though, did they, early on?
No.
And
they did start distancing themselves.
Yeah, and now I've heard more recently they're saying that they didn't get the credit they deserved back then. And it's saying, well, you can't have it both ways. But
yeah,
no 2 ways. I mean, they are huge, but I fucking hate Def Leppard.
They were huge. Now they're playing fairs across the country. I don't know.
I own nothing by Def Leppard, and I appreciate the early albums. The music was good, but Joe Elliott, his vocals are like nails down a chalkboard for me. He makes me want to vomit when I hear him sing, and I cannot. I can't. I mean, I'm so upset right now that we're even talking about it, because I never talk about it.
No, not going to make anybody's best of anything list at this point, but for the sake I'll mention them for the sake that
I did. They were huge, but I did read also that they've been cited as an influence by a wide range of musical artists, including Taylor Swift. So
impressive.
Slayer can't claim that, can they?
No. Well, there's a couple different directions I could go here, but I think I'm gonna go into thrash. This is easily my favorite English thrash album. And the band never sounded like this album before, and they never sounded like it again. This is The Force by Onslaught. This album is great evil thrash. Yeah, there's a little bit of a Metallica influence in here, but the songwriting is so good. And the singer Cy, I believe is his name. I can't remember to be. Oh, wait.
Cy Keeler.
Yeah, Cy Keeler, exactly. Great, unique style. This wasn't funny. It was serious thrash with an evil slant, a lot of satanic lyrics. Let there be death, fight with the beast, demoniac, flame of the Antichrist. Oh my God. Great choruses, great songwriting. The album before it, a lot of people really like it because it's kind of it comes from a crusty hardcore place. After this, they got Steve Grimmett from Grim Reaper on something, The Erosion of Sanity. What the fuck is the name of the album after it? I don't own it, but
In Search of Sanity.
In Search of Sanity. Erosion of Sanity is Gorga. Sorry, but every album up to their fourth album, they all sound different. It's kind of like The Sentenced and other bands like that. They just never really stuck. They hit something good with this. They didn't stick with it. They shifted around, and a lot of you guys over in the UK, I've seen you showing like newer Onslaught stuff. I listen to it. It's okay. It's just not this. This is one of the albums to me that really put England on the map when it comes to thrash. I listen to this a lot, and I'll put this on and air guitar through the whole fucking thing. It's so good. Such a solid album. So good.
Yeah, Cy Keeler's popped in and out of the band over the years.
Yep.
Their new vocalist is pretty good now. It's a guy called Dave Gunn. He actually we had him on our Contact in Blood channel.
I saw it. It was good.
Ago, and it was kind of good to kind of get an insight of what the band is. I think Cy Keeler just I don't think he doesn't seem to be that into being in the band, certainly as a singer and touring. But yeah, that album is probably my favorite. I do like In Search of Sanity, but it's not an Onslaught album.
It's a different band. It's a different band for sure.
Yeah. All three of their first three albums are all good in different ways. But like you said, Marty, none of those first three albums sound like each other. And Andy, again, let me bounce this off of you because you may have more insights. I also just noticed with this Virus set, these first three Virus albums kind of follow the same pattern, where the first one is a little bit more of the punky, loose sound. The second one tightens up, is more of a thrash sound, and then the third one sounds a little different even from that. Was there any reason in particular that some of these British thrash bands were sort of rapidly evolving their sound from album to album, or was it just how things played out?
Wouldn't you not think though that by the time that those albums were coming out, late 80s, thrash was evolving anyway? People were moving out of thrash, so I think maybe some of them had to evolve quickly to keep pace. I mean, certainly someone like Virus, I think they got a bit of money behind them. I think it might have been, I read it was at one of the other band's expenses. It might have been at some like Onslaught's expense. So the record company poured money into Virus, so they did have that more polished sound on the Lunacy. The first album is a bit messy. I mean, it's raw, and then you've got Force Recon, which I quite like. Nothing particularly original. Lunacy, which is more polished, but they had the money behind them to do that. I just think it was because it was late in the day. Thrash had evolved, and this is a kind of an issue I have with a lot of modern bands. There's a lot of bands playing sort of the old traditional thrash now, and they put out an album, and you think, oh, they've picked out some really good elements. You can hear different influences in there, and then they go and put out another album, and it's like, well, okay, that's very similar. But because they want to play thrash, they stick into the formula. But thrash itself didn't last very long. It only lasted a few years, and then the bands all moved on to something else. And the modern bands can't evolve or move on because they want to play the old school thrash. So a lot of these bands put out one good album, and I think some of the UK bands were a little bit guilty of that. They tried to hold on to that sound longer than the record companies weren't interested. They dropped everybody because either the grunge came in or it was the more extreme side that was people were more interested in. So it was the UK thrash scene was just so compressed. They either had to change quickly or not evolve and just get dropped.
Okay, no, that makes sense. That's a good point too about like the sort of the new wave thrash bands and even new wave of traditional heavy metal bands. You're right that they're, from the ones I've checked out, it's kind of hard for them to consistently make really good albums because they're stuck in this very narrow time frame of what they're emulating.
Yeah.
That it's like they make one album that sounds, hey, yeah, this really sounds like 1983 all over again. But what are they going to do on the next album? Well, they're almost stuck in this. They've painted themselves into this corner where the next album is going to sound just like 1983 again, and the third release will sound just like 1983 all over again.
Or they put out the synth guitar.
or now it's 1986, and we had the synth guitar. And there has to be a limit to how long you can use that currency before it just wears itself out. I like a lot of these newer bands. I'm glad, that some of them are doing that style, but I do wonder how much mileage that they've got in sticking to that formula, which is a formula. It's not like it's their own formula even. It's a formula they're borrowing from a few decades before.
Yeah, that's why a lot of those bands I like an album, but then I don't dig too deeply because I don't want to spoil what I like about that album by hearing it done again. Yeah,
that's a good point. I kind of feel the same way.
All right, Andy, you are up.
Okay. How about Crash Bang Wallop? How about some Raven?
Fuck, I totally forgot to pull some Raven. How could I forget to pull some Raven? Holy shit.
But yeah, I mean, straight from the get-go. What is it these guys invented? Athletic rock.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what? I hate the term when people say things like proto thrash. I mean, it was just speedy heavy metal, and it did influence a lot.
It's really good. It's really good.
A lot. I mean, they just played the stuff a bit faster.
Yeah.
And again, they're still going, but they're one of those bands that are still going, and they're still playing really small clubs.
Oh my God. I was going to bring that comment. I was going to bring that up. They just toured the US. I've seen some video footage and some pictures. There's nobody in the clubs. They're just doing it for the love of doing it. The people that are there are diehard fans. And it's kind of like the Anvil thing. Although Anvil to me was always silly, whereas Raven was more serious and just like total that early new wave of British heavy metal charged up a bit, Yeah.
They are the UK Anvil, but I think better because I mean, and again, they had their dark period when they went to Atlantic, and but I mean, talk about album, fillers in a collection, but that is an abomination.
Oh, it's a fucking turd. And Stay Hard isn't great either.
No,
yeah, but then they redeem themselves.
Yeah, Life's a Bitch is pretty good too.
But yeah, but Raven are just one of those bands. Again, they're from Newcastle. They're from the same stamping ground as Venom. Newcastle is a tough. Newcastle is a fantastic city. I mean, it's one of the best nights out I've ever had has been in Newcastle. People are brilliant, and it's all built on like shipbuilding and industry, and the people party hard, and the bands partied hard and played hard, and and they're still going. I'm sure they are doing it for the love of the music, but I'm sure they also need a pay packet because I don't think they've ever really sort of hit the heights that they perhaps deserved. But again, pretty much all of the big four cite them as a band that made them sort of sit up and think this is faster music. I like this. What can we do with this? Can we make this even faster? They're kind of, for me, they're somewhere in the middle of traditional heavy metal and Venom, maybe more.
Mentioning Anvil, I mean, Anvil they have got their moments. There's some good Anvil records, but Anvil is built on a really great drummer, whereas Raven, I mean, the brothers, I mean, the bass, they're technically great musicians. The music they write is good. I think maybe the vocal style is a little bit too unique and turned a lot of people off. I don't know what it is, but hats off to them for still fucking doing it after shit. How many years? 40 years, 50 years? Who knows? But crazy. It's crazy. The Gallagher brothers, cheers to them. They're still doing it, and they're playing these little clubs in front of nobody, and they're fucking still having a great time. Yeah, and that's what it's all about.
There must have been about no more than 50 when I saw them in Glasgow, and they put on their show. They did it, and they came out and they signed stuff and they took photos, and they were absolutely spot on. They were nice guys.
Well, they realized that they're influential in a weird way, even though they don't have the huge fan base, which is sad, but they still, I think they appreciate their longevity and where they're at. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really appreciate those guys. They're great. I think I've got a bunch of their records. I don't have them all, but I've got a good chunk of them. They're a very good band.
Yeah. Raven. Yeah. I think they did, definitely, I think they still suffer a little bit from that whole athletic rock tag that got stuck on them with, wearing the hockey gear and stuff like that, it was, there was a case where, again, at least the American audience, it was maybe a little too goofy looking, and heavy metal fans can be pretty picky. If you get that goofy tag, it's hard to shake sometimes. Just sad but true. And yeah, then being on a major label like Atlantic, of course, doesn't sit well. Sometimes it's easy to write that off, and sometimes bands don't bounce back from that fully, even though they may put out much better music later on.
All right, Alan, you're up.
All right, let's see what to pick next. I'll stick with some of the classics for now. So if you're looking at early influences, what helps define heavy metal going into the new wave of British heavy metal, one of the bands that never had a huge US following but had a huge impact on metal was UFO. I just pulled this one because it's one of the only ones I have a physical copy of. But in terms of, again, today most people would obviously put UFO as 70s rock or stuff, but they could be considered part of the heavy metal scene of the 1970s. And in terms of guitar work, songcraft, they're one of those bands that you always saw cited when new wave of British heavy metal bands got interviewed back in the day. When people asked, the Sweet Savages of the world and, all these, other bands, Mendes Prey and stuff, who are your influences? UFO is always one of the first 2 or 3 names they would list in their interview. Of course, they had Schenker for, a long span, top-notch guitarist of all time. But yeah, just the general approach of, how to write, good, compact songs that, were catchy, but still tough and still solid. It was sort of, no nonsense in a way. And that mentality and aesthetic carries over into the new wave of British heavy metal. UFO, those albums, they're different from Budgie. They don't have the quirky songs, and they may have a slow song or a ballad or something per album, but you don't have all this wide variety. The albums are more consistent in their composition from song to song to song, and that's something that really started to stand out when you got into the new wave of British heavy metal. All the experimentation that bands would try in the 70s of really drawing on these different genres from song to song, that evaporated. That people did not want to hear that on an Iron Maiden album. Iron Maiden wasn't going to have 2 bangers, 2 prog rock 70s songs, 1 Beatles inspired song, 1 song that was, maybe more of an acoustic folksy thing. No, it was going to be much more straightforward heavy metal start to finish. And I think UFO sets the template for some of that. They're one of those bands that didn't really survive the transition into the 80s all that well. And I think that's one reason they get a little overlooked. They had some hits in the US, but not on the same level as, other bands from that era that were in that hard rock heavy metal vein. But yeah, UFO still deserves to be mentioned as one of those bigger US bands. If folks haven't heard these first couple of albums, by the way, they're very different sounding than the classic albums that came later in the 70s. This one, is very bottom heavy, very distorted. It's closer in sound to like the Blue Cheer album, Vince Bus Eruption, than it is to tracks like Doctor Doctor and Rock Bottom and stuff. So they had some different grooves early on, but then settled in and became one of the kind of overlooked classics from that 70s era. I think they were bigger overseas than they've got the recognition for here. So I'll mention UFO and see what y'all think of that.
I'm late to them, but I love the Schenker era. What I've heard so far, it's been great.
I'm pretty much late to them. They fell into the category for me of the 70s when I was a forward thinking, finger on the pulse 80s teenager. And
Same here.
I know a lot of their songs. I mean, you can't go 40 years listening to this type of music and not get to know some songs from UFO. Certainly the more popular ones.
Lights Out. I mean, that's a huge song.
Yeah, but I have more Wasted albums than I have UFO albums. Pete Way following in the 80s. So I probably do need to dig in more. I no doubt will, but they're kind of not high on my list.
Yeah, when you can't get to everything right away, but and I was in that same camp you were in, Andy. For a long time, I just didn't check them out because they were in that dinosaur rock bin. I just didn't want to explore. What finally kind of got me into them, I had done back in the Lapland metal and Metal Maniacs forum days at the turn of the century. I did a big CDR trade with somebody. And I had mentioned it, somebody had brought up UFO, and I had mentioned it. I never really wanted to check them out, just another 70s hard rock band. And someone just copied like their whole discography and included in the trade, like, you didn't ask for these, but you're going to listen to them once and then tell me you don't like it. And at some point, I was like, okay, I'll throw these on in the background while I'm giving the cat a bath or something. I was just like, oh shit, I have seriously misjudged these, and now must go publicly correct myself.
Right. All right, I'm going to stick with the thrash thread here, and my second favorite English thrash band is Sabbat, Martin Walkyier. They put out 3 albums. Morning is Broken was after Martin left, and it's a turd of an album. Sorry, I've tried.
That is one of the worst CDs I've ever paid money for.
It's bad. But this is aggressive, unique sounding thrash. I would say they even have a bit of a German feel to them. I don't know if people from England would probably hurl garbage at me for saying that. I got this record for $10, by the way. How was that for back in the day when
recently you didn't?
No, that wasn't about the war, Grandpa.
Yeah. It was before people cared about vinyl, but and after this band disbanded, Martin went on to be in Skyclad. The Wayward Sons of Mother Earth is their debut album. It reminds me a lot of Sabbat, other than it's got Georgie, what's her name? I don't remember, on violin. Very excellent album. A lot of this early Skyclad is excellent. Their first album being their obvious best, in my opinion anyway. But Sabbat, they started off super evil on A History of a Time to Come. Every song's about Satan. Every time you hear the word Satan, take a shot. You'll be fucked up by song 3. Dreamweaver, they went more pagan, which is where the spiritual evolution landed on Skyclad. Very much Ren Fair type of thrash. Very good. The violin made them super unique. Excellent English thrash. Pagan thrash, however you want to size it up. Great stuff. And if I stepped on anybody's toes by showing that, I'm sorry.
No, that's cool. That's a very, very good pick. The only reason I didn't pull Sabbat to show is I've got my cover of Dreamweaver is framed up here above the desk, and those things are a pain to get down off the wall.
Such a great album cover too. It's great album art.
Oh yeah, that's why it's on the wall, so I can look
Yeah,
at it and be happy anytime I want.
Exactly. Andy, you're up.
Well, I was just going to mention about so Sabbat were one that I was late to the party with, but you mentioned you went on to sort of mention Skyclad being a band that evolved from them as well. But are you aware of bands like Hell with so Andy Sneap was involved in this one. This was David Halliday was the guy that taught him guitar, and resurrected this band and went on to sort of produce some of that stuff. And that was way after Sabbat. And we'll see. Race Against Time was the band that. So this was. I don't think this was originally released at the time, or maybe as an EP.
Never heard of that album. Well, who's on that? Bill Halliday. Okay.
Dave Halliday. He was his mentor. But this is a High Roller record release, and this was put together by Andy Sneap as kind of a bit of a tribute to his mentor. It's good. It's kind of new wave of British heavy metal era music. But still, yeah. So when I think of Sneap now, obviously it's all overproduced. Every album sounding the same.
Was that you want to show that for this round?
No. Oh, sorry. Is it me up for?
Yeah. You're up. Yep.
Yeah, so I was just jumping on your Sabbat there. Sorry. So
Mark says Martin learned to breathe through his arsehole to enable him to bark out those vocal lines live. Yeah, I mean, Dreamweaver is so many lyrics. It's kind of like John Arch era, Waken the Guardian level lyrics, just thrown over all the music. Anyway, go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
Anyway, I'm going down the other big band, which not as big as Priest, not as big as Maiden, but still, they've got a fairly big influence on music. Saxon. It didn't necessarily start out too good, but I mean, I pulled out some albums just for examples. But to go from this in 1979, when they kind of looked like that, to only 1 year later, all of a sudden looking a bit more heavy metal.
Yeah,
and not releasing not just one, but two great albums in a year, and going from, I guess, almost a bit more rainbow sounding. The songs are a bit, they were a bit lighter weight and they were a bit melodic, to saying, this is heavy metal thunder. 20,000 feet, Motorcycle Man.
747, Strangers in the Night.
I mean, Denim and Leather came later, but this was all, this was Denim and Leather metal.
Yeah.
And they reacted quickly to what was happening around them. But again, I think a bit like Priest, they influenced a lot of bands early on, but then were influenced by a lot of bands. They had their blip in the mid 80s. These three aren't great. Innocence and Rock Till You Drop and Destiny. They were almost, I think, on Destiny, they were trying to get some of Def Leppard's Millions. They were trying to break the US market. They had that softer, almost poppier metal sound, and they realized they just couldn't do it. Then they went back with a solid ball of rock, and then they just carried on churning out consistently good metal albums. I mean, we discussed this a little bit before, Marty, about the new album is 100% Saxon, but it's not necessarily the Hell for Leather Saxon that Thunderbolt was or Battering Ram was before it. It was probably the Saxon album that they kind of needed to make at this time of their career. I mean, maybe they are slowing down a little bit. I mean, I've been trying to see. I had tickets for Saxon for their 40th anniversary show, and but that was 2020.
The last time they toured the US, they played less than a mile from my house, and with UFO, and I did not go. I had
Your
not
gotten was not true, sir.
I know I fucked up so bad. I just didn't want to pay $25 for two bands I hadn't heard at that point. And then since then, I got into the more power metal era of Saxon, and now I'm like listening to these records and going, "Fuck! I should have went to that show." There was nobody there. Nobody there.
So, Andy, I'm looking for a new co-host. Would you be interested in a weekly gig?
I say good stuff sometimes.
Is this
Oh,
for a
sit over there and eat your green bean casserole.
It's delicious.
But yeah, but for Saxon, for me, they actually did they were churning out the same stuff over and over again, and they did. There's a documentary, and it's on YouTube. You can find it. It's 2 or 3 parts, and it's one of these documentaries where it's usually some guru goes into a business and sorts out the business. And I don't know if you get those, but you get those in the US, I'm sure. Where a company's failing. I can't remember the name of the guy, but he's a famous guy over here. He's a troubleshooter, and he went to Saxon, and he basically was telling them what they needed to do to be successful again. And it's a brilliant documentary. It's really funny in places because they put together a new song, they play it for him, and he's sitting there, and he describes the song as pedestrian. And Biff Byford, honestly, his reaction is just absolutely fantastic. You'll have to. I'll dig out the link and send it to you guys because it's a brilliant documentary to watch. It's very
Awesome.
It's very kind of 90s British documentary fodder. But he had them doing all sorts of things, not stupid things, but he was just trying to say, he tried to like change their image, and now you see Biff wearing that big coat that he has all the time. And it was basically that was introduced, and Nigel Glocker, they cut his hair, the drummer, and it's almost like they've not actually changed again. They're still stuck in their ways but the music is still good. I still love Saxon. They're one of those bands that I will collect everything. Certainly from a vinyl perspective, I have my vinyl bands, I have my CD bands, and they're one of my vinyl bands. And I just think even at the age they are now, getting into their 70s, they're still able to put together absolutely fantic output.
Relevant output.
Oh, the songs are all the kind of, I don't see how they would necessarily click with a lot of the younger generation, but they have songs about things like the Industrial Revolution, about steam, and about history. And it's not the same way that Maiden do it, but it's almost like textbook history that Saxon is singing about, but it works. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Saxons, they found their lane. They're comfortable in it. They do a good job with it. They're not likely to really get ever bigger than they are right now, but they have a dedicated fan base that's going to stick with them. They really were one of the quintessential denim and leather style bands in the early 80s. And yeah, they went through some weird changes in the 80s. Some people like those albums, some people don't. Some folks in the comments have mentioned that they like some of those albums, but they kind of persevered through it. They kind of worked through all of that, and they found their niche, and they carved it out, and good for them. We're better for it. I've only heard maybe half the new album so far, but yeah, I thought it was really good. I'm impressed.
It's good. It's just a bit long and kind of samey. I mean, I like the last 3 albums a lot better, but I've only listened to the new album once, so I can't throw too many opinions around at this point.
Yeah, they have slowed it down a little bit. It's not the full on assault that sort of like Thunderbolt was, where they had that guy from, was it Amon
Marth?
Marth, yeah. They had a few guest vocalists on the last one, and it's
the riff on that title track for the new album, that riff is a monster. They nail it on that one.
I'm a big fan of dynamics, and listen to the new Saxon. A lot of the songs are all kind of the same speed. If it's a long album, there should be some headbangers in there just to break up the fucking, But other than that, what I heard, I'm like, I'll buy this eventually. I don't want to pay modern day vinyl prices for it, but I'll get it eventually. I still don't own Thunderbolt. I've got the 3 before it on vinyl. Thunderbolt I need to get. Every time I see it, it's too much, or it's from England. If it's an affordable price, I still have to pay international shipping fees, which suck.
Mm-hmm.
And but yeah, anyway, Alan, you're up next.
Okay. I'll mention these 2 together because they kind of fit. I haven't mentioned any real solid new wave of British heavy metal yet, so I've been good. But a couple of those do deserve some extra mention. So want to mention Diamond.
There we go.
Angel Witch. Here, folks, go. These two bands, have a big impact from the UK. Now, neither went on to especially conquer the world and become huge rock stars. Diamond Head, got the big contract with MCA and proceeded to make some albums that are of questionable quality. They have some moments, but they also, again, Diamond Head was another band that kind of wanted to be more Led Zeppelin than Iron Maiden, and it shows pretty quickly. But still, Lightning to the Nations, the first album, it's one of the early benchmarks that really set the tone for the new wave of British heavy metal. It's a band doing their own demo, and to get people to listen to it, they press it up themselves on vinyl, and they just start sending it out. You come to the
What
gig,
an unassuming album cover. That does not say "Buy Me" on their album shelf. It just does.
Well,
not.
This is a later pressing. This is the cover that was put on the Wolf Records pressing, and it's always been disputed whether that was even a legit pressing or not. At least some of the band considers it a bootleg pressing. The original copies were just plain white covers. It's even worse.
Yep.
But still, it's a monster of an album. Now, yes, is the band mainly known for their Metallica connection? They are, but it's not just a matter that Lars and company covered some of their songs. In Lars's formative days of trying to get a band together, he took a European vacation, which I guess is something that rich tennis playing Euro kids can do. And he followed, he hooked up with Diamond Head and followed them around on tour for a while.
And Motorhead.
And started to learn the ropes of being a band and being touring and stuff with them. If Diamond Head doesn't exist, or Diamond Head sees this kid and tells him to fuck off or whatever, Metallica probably doesn't come together. Accounts the very early days of Metallica, that it was a very loose proposition with him and James just really kind of screwing around and not having a clue what to do. But it was when Lars comes back from that trip and is very now focused. He has a path forward. He's learned what to do, and he's now going to do it. He's much more focused and dedicated to it. You take Diamond Head's Lightning to the Nations out of the equation, and Metallica doesn't exist, and none of us ever have to hear Enter Sandman again. So wait, that might have been a good thing. I think I went off the trail of thought there just for a minute, but
all roads go back to Metallica. What's up with that?
Nothing else.
Yeah. So regardless, Diamond Head's impact, while the band itself never became a name commodity, they had a huge impact on heavy metal. Angel Witch kind of in the same boat. They were another one that got into the new wave of British heavy metal scene very early, attracted attention. They had been working at it for a few years. This band, traced their roots back to at least 77, maybe 76. They had demoed material. They amassed a following for doing this heavier, darker style of music, and did well with this first album, but they fell prey to the classic lineup instability issues. It took them a ridiculous number of years to get their second album out. This was during an era where, like Andy showed with Saxon, bands could put out 2 albums in a year, and that wasn't unusual. Angel Witch has what, a 5-year gap, 4-year gap between albums 1 and 2. They basically put something out at the start of the new wave of British heavy metal, and by the time the second one comes out, the party's over. So they really missed the boat there. But that first Angel Witch album, had a huge impact on a lot of folks. Once again, Dave Mustaine, in his more lucid moments, this is one of the albums he quickly will point to as being a huge thing for him in figuring out, that's how I want to play. That's how I want to sound. That's what I want my band, this is what I want to to really emulate. So they're 2 outstanding albums from bands that had tons of potential, and even though they didn't quite get over the hump, they did push other bands along quite a bit. So that's my big new wave of British heavy metal entry for the evening.
Okay.
And Diamond Head is still. I don't know if you've heard the latest lineup, but they have I think they've got a lineup that is respectful of the old songs, they're able to deliver against them, but they're also writing some good stuff as well. And I saw them on this tour when they did the self-titled a few years ago.
Yeah, I've heard a little bit of the newer stuff. I know they did the 40th anniversary kind of remaking of Lightning.
That's kind of okay. I mean, I forgave them for that because I mean the singer they've got at the moment, the vocalist Rasmus Bon Anderson, is fantastic. He has got the range to do the early stuff, but also his voice is a bit heavier, but he's absolutely killer. I mean, if you get to see Diamond Head live, they're still doing it great, and they still kind of play small shows as well. So you can literally just stand in front of Brian Tatler and watch him play, and it's a joy to behold. I've seen them about 3 or 4 times. They come to the same venue in Edinburgh, or they came to the same venue every year. Recently, this is charity thing that they do, and absolutely fantastic. Whereas Angel Witch, I never thought I would own this on vinyl, but when somebody on eBay lists it as Angle Witch, and your minimum bid wins, you can get this.
That guy was fucking pissed. That guy was pissed.
You must have wondered why you only got like 15 quid for it. I mean, at the time I was thinking like, well, I've had this for quite a few years now, but it was when this album was worth twice what I paid for it, and Angle Witch popped. I wasn't even searching for it, but it came up with specifically.
Poor bastard.
But again, they're still going, and I think this is a phenomenal album. This is what
it's good.
Angel of
Great
Light.
cover art. Great cover art.
Really, I mean, it's obviously it's a nod to their classic album, but this is a solid album, and it shows that they've still got what it takes to deliver. Great band.
Yeah, I was pleasantly surprised with that album. I was real hesitant about buying it. It's just like, I don't know. And this, I mean, I liked all 3 of those first Angel Witch albums. A lot of folks don't care for albums 2 and 3. But still, it's a long time later. Do they still have it? But yeah, I took a chance and bought that one. It's like, oh yeah, it's a very solid album. It's got some really strong tunes on it. And yeah, you got to love those eBay auctions where something's
Angle Witch.
Yep. Every now and then, yep, you can get lucky and do that. I think folks have gotten better about that. I used to with some collectible, like, they're not Pokemon, but the Magic the Gathering cards. I'll buy those at times. And some of the really old, expensive ones are supposed to be spelled DUAL, dual cards. And a lot of people misspell them, or used to DUEL, dual. And you could buy them for like, $5-10 a piece when they were $100 cards that way.
All right. Next up for me, this is probably the last of my thrash stack. When this album came out, it seemed like a lot to process. There's a lot going on this record, and it's Sacrilege Within the Prophecy. This album, vocalist is Tam. She's got a very screamy, shouty, hardcore style, and I didn't think much about it when it came out. I enjoyed it. I like it. But listening to it recently, if you do not hear where Bolt Thrower got its influence, it's this album or the album before it. Sacrilege. If you listen to this and then revisit Bolt Thrower, you will understand where Bolt Thrower got their thing. They're all friends back in the day. They all came from the punk scene. They're all friends with Tam. This is really great. It has aged remarkably well, seeing what the trajectory of heavy UK, death and grind and doom and all that stuff went. This album at the time was strange, maybe a little bit weird with the lady singer on the front, but up front. But listening to it nowadays, like I said, you could see this is the precursor to Bolt Thrower. You could tell where they lifted all their influence, a lot of influence from. Great album, solid. At the time, it seemed pretty unassuming, but listening to it, there's a lot going on. There's speed. I classified it as thrash back when this came out, 87 on Metal Blade. But Excellent album. I see you had that too, Andy. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I agree. That's it's the only thing I have from them. But it's a great album. I mean, weren't these the guys that made Sacrilege become Sacrilege BC?
That is the U.S. That's a U.S. band. They're Oakland area, Bay Area thrash.
Yeah, but they had to.
Yep, they made them. Yep. Like Wrathchild America.
Yeah, that's but I definitely prefer for this one. Yeah, it's great. I mean, I'm not that up to speed on Bolt Thrones, to be honest with you, to understand that the influence you're talking about, but I think I may go back and have another look there.
Listen to it again and think of Bolt Thrower, and you will hear it. It's crazy. I couldn't believe it. It was pretty evident, having not listened to it in a while.
But that's one of the ones I would definitely class as a UK thrash gem that's out there. Yep. And so there's a lot of them. So there's a much maligned period of UK metal history, but there are a lot of gems out there.
All right, Andy, you're up.
Okay, I think I've got one more that I'd prepare for, and this is a little obscure.
Oh, you've got one more. I've got a shit ton more. Sorry.
I could grab more, but
okay, right on. You may have to.
But I mean, if we're talking slightly obscure, and this is more of a link to one of the modern bands that's around now, and the link is that this band was pretty much defunct, but they've been reignited, and that's Mithra. I imagine Alan probably knows this band with his new wave of British heavy metal. So these guys only really had an EP. Again, this is High Roller doing another fantastic job of
they do a great job
releasing, and it's a early new wave of British heavy metal. The song like Death and Destiny is fantastic. Killer, UFO, Overlord. I think the original release, and Alan's going to get it. He's probably going to get his obscure London only pressing, but,
limited to 5.
Yeah, but this was the 40th anniversary edition. But they basically came back to life because of Night Demon cited them as a heavy influence. Now, Night Demon are obviously they're a modern new wave traditional heavy background, heavily influenced by Iron Maiden, but they love Mithra, and they basically got hold of them and said, can you get back together and come on tour with us? And they took them on tour. I discovered Mithra by seeing these guys playing their first UK show. They came over to Edinburgh a few years back, and they played their first UK show, again, in front of about 30 people, including myself. Absolutely fantastic stuff. But the Mithra guys were absolutely superb. They've released a more modern album again recently, which is pretty good, but it just kind of goes to show that there are still some gems out there which people may or may not know, if they're not as deep as Alan is into the new wave British heavy metal. That there are still bands out there that are picking up on some of these older bands and releasing stuff. And of course, Night Demon is one of the main guys in Night Demon, Jarvis Leatherby. He's also the guy that's reignited Cirith Ungol as well. He's their manager, I think, and also
he's their bass player.
Bass player
/ manager / get up grandpa.
He must have some kind of pull if he can call these. Like, will you get back together to tour with us? Yeah, sure, mate, no problem.
And then they get picked up by High Roller, and they've got a reissue and another album out. So, but I just think there's a lot of gems out there still to be discovered. I discovered them a lot through your channel, Alan. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So, yeah, so Mithra, not one I think is that well known, but plenty of good bands out there.
Yeah, Mithra is a great example of one of those bands. They hit just right. That EP came out right there at kind of the dawn of things with the new wave of British heavy metal in 1980. And then the wheels, and it did surprisingly well. It sold a ton of copies. This is the old original Guardian. It's a 7-inch EP with 2 tracks on each side. And it sold a ton of copies to the point that it got picked up and re-released with the more well-known cover art on Street Beat records. It sometimes is referred to as the lamp pressing because the serial number is lamp 2. The lamp pressing, I'll geek out for a minute. Yeah, this one, for whatever reason, only has 3 of the songs, if I recall correctly. So, yeah, you get Death and Destiny, UFO, and Killer. But for some reason, it leaves off the Overlord track. And so, yeah, the one with the picture sleeve is actually a later. It was released at the time. It probably came out in like late 80 or 81, but it's technically a second pressing on a different label. And they also did this one not just on a 7-inch format, but also a 12-inch format. I don't have the 12-inch version. I just have the original Guardian and then the 7-inch of this. And yeah, even before High Roller did their versions, Mithra was one of the first bands that got an anthology treatment when people started paying attention again. This was on, what is it called? It's been forever since I picked this up.
The High Roller is actually a reissue of that one, if I remember.
Okay, yeah, this is on a British Steel label that came out sometime around the turn of the century. It's got a 98 copyright actually. And so it's got some other tracks. It's got the EP and then a bunch of stuff they demoed, which apparently they didn't even have a good set of titles for some of these songs, that they kind of just ended up slapping titles on them to call them something. But you're right, Andy. The EP was a really good gem. It will appeal to fans of stuff like Satan, Angel Witch, those bands that, were a little faster, a little heavier. Jaguar fans would like Mithra. And the band just fell apart. They didn't get a chance to capitalize and release anything else before. It's the same old story of different musical ideas and members, and we've heard it 1,000 times before. It didn't work out, but yeah, really cool pick there.
Yeah. All right, Alan, you're up.
All right, I'll go in a little different direction that I'm sure some of y'all will touch on or follow this up on. One scene we haven't touched on tonight that, again, the UK really put its imprint on things was the sort of the Death Doom movement that became more of a thing in the latest 80s and especially then into the early 90s. You had the Peaceville 3. The one I picked for that era was My Dying Bride. Between them, Paradise Lost and Anathema, My Dying Bride's the one that stayed the course the longest. They had their slightly experimental phase and all that, but when I think of that style and that movement, My Dying Bride's the first band that I go with. I know a lot of people will pick Paradise Lost's Gothic first, but I'll usually go with Turn Loose the Swans.
That's where they started to slip for me. Once he started singing clean, man, I love the early stuff. When he started singing clean, I'm like, what the hell is this stuff?
I think they did very good with both styles. They did.
I ended up liking it eventually, but I love his death vocals so much.
Yeah, but he's very he's a very versatile vocalist, and he did very good. That the cleaner vocals added a sort of an extra dimension to it that let them get a little bit more into the Gothic, at least atmospheres, more so than they could with just the really heavy, deep growls. And so yeah, it's just another formula that a band here and there had worked around with maybe before, but the UK bands really took this sound and put it on the map. And of course, it's been a very popular style since, with tons of bands have followed in the wake of those three. Wake, Doom Death. Trying to make a joke there, maybe. You guys are no fun.
Please rehearse that one a bit more.
But this scene definitely needs a shout out tonight, and I'm going to shout out My Dying Bride for it. These, again, I picked a lot of folks. I do always feel like this album, Turn Loose the Swans, sadly overshadows everything else in their catalog to this day. That if you go out and ask 100 fans, name a My Dying Bride album, 90 of them are immediately just going to knee-jerk say Turn Loose the Swans. And it's a great album. It deserves a lot of credit. But they've got a lot of good albums in their catalog. It's not all about that one release. They did a lot of cool stuff.
So what would be the one that you call out? So they're not a band, or it's not really a style of music that I gravitate towards.
That's fair.
I don't mind the Death Doom stuff. I can listen to if someone throws a track my way, I will listen to it. It's not something I would generally listen to from a whole album. So, My Dying Bride, what would be your entry point, or a song or an album that? I mean, you mentioned that other one that say everyone talks about, but that kind of implied there's another one that you would talk about.
If I was going to wanted to introduce someone to the band, I would probably pick Light at the End of the World. It's the album where they got back on track after doing a couple albums. They had done one or two that were really focused on the clean vocals. It made them, not that they were going to be radio music, but it definitely made them more accessible. And then they made one album that was a little more experimental that didn't go over well at the time. And the band kind of took stock at the time and realized, we've kind of lost the plot here. Maybe we should get back on the rails and do what we do best. And Light at the End of the World saw the band return to form. And
keep in mind that's got clean vocals. If you're into more of a death doom, I would go with As the Flower Withers. It's all death vocals.
It is, but that's it's a good album. But I think they did better albums later on. Not regardless of vocal style. I think they got better with some time. Nothing wrong with As the Flower Withers, but I wouldn't introduce people to the band that way because they didn't stick to that style for very long.
Do you know what? I will listen to a bit out of both of those and then decide which of the two of you I like best as a result. How about that?
Yeah. It makes me wonder with the inclusion of the violin, if there is a Sabbat or a Skyclad influence there. I mean, Skyclad were kind of revolutionary by introducing that violin to the fold, the metal fold,
Yeah, I'm wondering if My Dying Bride were already sort of up and running, though a little too early to be influenced by Skyclad. When does Wayward Sons come out? 90, 91, 92?
I can look it up on the Oracle real quick.
You check Skyclad and I'll check My Dying Bride, and we'll see how these correlate. My Dying Bride is demoing stuff by 91.
Yeah, Wayward Sons of Mother Earth, the full length came out in 91.
Okay, so I mean, it's possible they heard Skyclad demos or something, but yeah, it sounds like maybe they're just kind of had the same idea about the same time, probably rather than influencing one or the other. And they do use it kind of differently. I mean, with Skyclad, it's got a much more folky lint to it. With My Dying Bride, it's definitely going for the sad panda kind of sound.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to show 3 in a row here because they're, I think, all kind of linked, but you can't really go in. Knowing how England progressed into the crusty punk that eventually went into more grind, which all kind of came from that crust era, you really can't not mention Amoebix. Amoebix is a punk band very influenced by Venom and Motorhead. This stuff is very influential. A lot of crust punks. Of course, Rob kind of got his ass in trouble by reading some stupid books and saying some stupid things, but this is a very influential album when it comes to crust punk and when it comes to metal, and it spawned other things in England. Here's another one, Axe Grinder, Rise of the Serpent Men. I used to have the original pressing of this, decided I didn't need it, sold it for a lot of money, and then regretted it. Ended up getting the smart reissue, but the original pressing of this came out on Peaceville, one of the very early Peaceville releases. But again, this is very bolt thrower-ish, crusty, death, hardcore grind. There isn't a lot of blast on it, but it's very crusty, very earthy, crusty stuff. And another band kind of in the same realm is Prophecy of Doom with Acknowledge the Confusion Master. This is a very simplistic plotting. It's not really grind, but it's just really crusty. It's like on the cusp of being grind, really heavy, really crusty. Excellent stuff from the UK. Awesome picture, awesome album. I actually bought this from Gene from Angel Corpse back in the day. and I paid too much for it because it's not in the best of shape. But anyway, great album. Crusty Death Grind. The grind isn't really here much on this Prophecy of Doom or the Axe Grinder, but you can kind of tell it's just before things started to get really super fast. What year did this come out? Made in England. It's out on Peaceville. I don't see a date. Oh, 1990. Def Records. Good stuff. Crusty, sick, very political leanings on the Prophecy of Doom, to be sure. And England has got a very rich punk history, and I'm going to get into that here in a bit soon. But Amebix, this came out in 96, I believe, 96 or 97. 96 on Alternative Tentacles. Great stuff, very influential.
I'm going to make a note of those because I have not heard of either of them, and not in my comfort zone at all. But always up for at least getting the context of what you've been saying and playing that back and hearing what you're about. Certainly, the UK punk style it bleeds into a lot of the metal genre that we've come up with here.
Yep, there's a definite cross section of stuff, cross pollination of stuff that ended up being, stuff like Bolt Thrower, Napalm Death, Carcass, all that stuff is very much pulling from the punk scene. Amebix, like they were pulling from Motorhead and Venom and stuff like that, but they gave it a crusty edge. Good stuff. It's good stuff.
You have just, by mentioning Motorhead, you have just reminded me of one that I got to pull. There we go.
Yeah, I didn't pull any Motorhead because we did a 5-hour stream with Chris Black talking about the entire fucking catalog, which was way more extensive than I thought it was going to be. Anyway, you're up, Andy.
Well, talking of Motorhead, but not Motorhead, but influenced by Motorhead.
Right on.
Some early Tank. They were a little bit of a, I guess, a shot. Not they were new wave of British heavy metal, but they were also raw. And this kind of implies, it says here, free live single from Motorhead and Tank, and it's not from Motorhead at all. It's just that it was this album was produced by Eddie Clark, and it does have that Motorhead feel to it. It's quite raw. It's a little uncontrolled. It's kind of the dog's on the leash, but it's trying to get off it. But I don't think. I mean, the Power and the Glory, which was, I think they also released this the same year. Is it the Power of the Glory? I can't remember now.
Power of the Hunter.
Power of the Hunter. That's it. Power of the Glory. That's Saxon, isn't it? It's late. Forgive me.
Sorry, man. I was so sorry.
Yeah. So Power of the Hunter is a little bit more. It's a little bit more controlled. But still a decent sound. And you've got Algie Ward. Good. Sorry, I'll get all mixed up here. Good power trio. The best way to get hold of this, so obviously this one came with, you often see this album with the hype sticker, but without the single. But another eBay trick is to buy the album and then buy the single and stick them together, and all of a sudden your record's worth twice as much as what you paid for it.
Right. Which we will never profit from because we'll never fucking sell it because we have a sickness.
Yeah, especially when I've got 2 copies and I did the same thing twice. The intention to sell one on, but I haven't. But again, yeah. So produced by Eddie Clark. Even songs like "He Fell in Love with a Stormtrooper." Again, there's that slightly humorous side to it, but the song sounds really serious, like he actually did fall in love with a stormtrooper, and you end up believing the tunes with it. And the saddest thing about this band is it became one of those bands where they all fell out, and then there's 2 versions of them, and they're both called Tank. And if you're not careful, you one of them is the Algie Ward tank, and the other one's the Tucker Evans tank. But they were a great band early on. I've got a few of their albums from the 80s. This Means War is great. That carries on a bit more from the Filth Hound of Hades era 4-piece at this point. Music Foundation's label. Yeah. Nice, big, influential label for me growing up.
Oh, how could it not be? It's in your backyard. How are you doing on getting all of the Music for Nations? I know that's kind of a thing, isn't it, for you?
It was until the plan was to get the first 100, because the first 100, it looks like the first 100 was the whole of the 80s. Yep. Then towards the end of the 100, the numbering got a little bit strange, and then some of the late 90s were early 90s, and then some of them I think it's probably when they probably allocated the numbers when they agreed to do the albums with the band, not necessarily in the order that they were releasing things, and also they had a lot of shitty bands.
Yeah.
When it came to all the 100, there's a few sort of alt rock things, and I kind of realized it's one of those moments when you think buying records just because they're on the label is a stupid idea.
It's stupid, but I've done it. I mean, we all do it.
You can get burned that way. Yeah.
There are a few that I still want. There's still some Exciter on Music Foundations that I want. There's still some Merciful Fate on Music Foundations that I'd like to get, but there's a number that I have acquired that I'm looking to now offload. So I've got over that obsession.
Right on.
One of those things that you do. I enjoyed it for a while, and I did a whole series of videos. It was great fun. But now I'm if they are actually a shit band, that I don't need to own it.
It's the thrill of the hunt, man. And when we have a mission, when I was on the Halloween mission, when I discovered that I loved the Andy Darris era, it was like I had so much fun searching for that shit online until it's all gone. They're like, now what am I going to buy? I'm sure I'll find something. But
yeah, so I've got over that obsession now. I'm in a better place for it, and yeah.
That's what your wife says. That's what your wife tells you. Don't listen to her.
Like any recovering addict, we're in a better place now.
Right.
But yeah, so Tank, I think, is a really kind of influential band, because again they influenced a lot of the speed metal bands. They had that Motorhead link in.
Fuck yeah.
I love Halloween. They've got the Motorhead link in as well. Despite Motorhead not being a heavy metal band that they didn't want to be, they influenced a hell of a lot of heavy metal bands.
Oh, they sure did. Yep. Holy shit, look at what just popped up. Webcams chat. Wow, Russian bots.
That's not one of my followers. I wish.
Oh, okay, that's a thing, I guess.
Okay, Alan, you're next.
Okay. All right. Well, the quick announcement before, because it's late his time, but it's bedtime our time. So
hey, bud,
to say goodnight.
How's it going, Dean?
Yeah. So what are we going to do tomorrow?
Do the tour. Good luck for the Raikou.
We're going for Raikous on Pokemon Go.
Go get them.
12 hours of Pokemon hunting tomorrow. So
12 hours. So we're gonna need to pack up some lunch or go to Moe's or something.
They're definitely gonna have to do that.
Lunch with us. Absolutely.
You got to catch them all, though.
You hit on
See you, Dean.
Right?
Bye, Dean.
Night, Bye. Love you. Get a good night's sleep. We're going to need it.
Oh, he's cute.
He's wanted to. He's actually awake since we're doing the earlier time, so he so wanted to come in and say hello.
Oh, that's cool, man. No, he's a sweetheart for sure.
It'll be a hell of a day tomorrow. He's not kidding. We got 12 hours of Pokemon.
You need to curb this. I got to the point with Pokemon hunting. I would get in the truck. I'd slow down by the Pokestops. I'm like, spin the wheel. I'm not stopping.
We're
sure
going
you got
hard.
those extra battery packs.
Yeah,
exactly. We got 2 battery packs already on the steps next to the front door, ready to go. The wife's packing the picnic lunch. We're gonna catch all of Pokemon. But let's get back on track here. So yeah, Andy showed off, excellent sort of Motorhead influenced band with Tank. Motorhead influenced other bands as well. Can't mention Motorhead's fan base without also mentioning Girl School. Girl School, this first album, Demolition. They did a bunch of other albums. This is a Japanese pressing of Demolition. This is a white label promo of Demolition. And then you've got Hit and Run on red vinyl. You've got Hit and Run on black vinyl. You got Hit and Run. I swear to God, I own more Girl School albums than this. But Girl School very much followed suit in that Motorhead style. They were very good at it too. Sometimes, of course, there was a tendency for people to want to treat them as a little bit of a novelty act, having an all-female lineup, but they had a solid lineup, and they gigged extensively and made a reputation for themselves. Not the easiest thing to do in that day and age. And they not only influenced by Motorhead, they toured with Motorhead and got along famously with them. They did this 10-inch EP. This is also on Bronze. That St. Valentine's Day Massacre, where you've got the band kind of playing together on some of each other's songs. Fun cover shoot with all the mod kind of look going on.
And you hear rumors that that is part of the reason why Eddie got pissed off and left, was because of Lemmy's dalliances with Girl School and Wendy O. Williams and wanting to do all these shows and songs with them, and it kind of pissed off Eddie a bit.
I've heard it about Wendy Williams. I have not heard that, the Girl School thing was part of it directly, but I could have been. Don't know. Regardless, Girl School they do the Motorhead thing very, very well. And they were a very successful band at the time. This wasn't, a lot of times people hear new wave of British heavy metal and they immediately think, oh, how many albums did they sell? 5? Girl School was huge. This was a big big venue headlining band.
They were
early albums. Yes, Girl School was a big selling act early on.
Did not know that.
They absolutely were. They had the same problems that other new wave of British heavy metal bands were. They couldn't really sustain momentum. They started to have some lineup changes and a little bit of a change in direction towards more commercial waters that didn't bring on new fans, and it alienated the old fans. So they really started to fall, between the cracks a bit. But no, a Girl School, would have been right there beside things like Tigers of Pantang, Def Leppard, in terms of, very big, sellers. This was not a, little obscure thing. There's a reason they had so many albums come out, during that era and persisted. Well, I know they still had albums come out in the late 80s. I don't know how much farther they made it beyond that. So some of the late 80s albums with by the time Tracy Lamb and others sort of joined the band, they usually could manage at least a few fun songs, but they definitely lost that early real driving Motorhead vibe that they were very good at, because it was heavy, but the songs were still, they were very catchy songs as well. I mean, it made perfect sense when you listen to it. Yeah, this is the kind of music people would eat up if they want heavy but catchy music. So yeah, that's Tank's a great one to mention. There's plenty of other bands that Motorhead influenced too. Warfare. Some people would say Warfare were influenced by Tank, but that also means they were influenced by Motorhead. So yeah, there's definitely a sort of little subgenre there of the Motorhead school of new wave of British heavy metal for sure.
Because Lemmy actually discovered them and got them onto the Bronze label, wasn't it?
Yeah, he kind of brought them on, because I think also Girl School was on his Guar Records label in the mid 80s. Yeah. After he left Bronze, Girl School followed him over there for at least what was it? Take a Bite, the one with the bad vampire cover art, I think is on Guar from Girl School. Maybe
Take a Bite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
This was when they were doing around the same time that Saxon were kind of trying to go commercial. And they weren't a band. They were a good band. They were a proper band. They weren't a manufactured band of women to sell metal through.
No, not
image.
at all.
but
No.
the record labels wanted to push them that way. They did a horrendous album. They went the Raven route, and they did a horrendous album that was only released in the US that I won't even have as a filler. It's just it's a horrible, almost like a pop album.
Which one is that, Andy? I don't remember that one, or I may not have heard that one.
I can't remember what it's called, but then they came back, and I think that's when they went to GWR after that. Yeah, I think this was the one after, maybe. Nightmare Maple Cross was the one.
Nightmare Maple.
Yeah, because Screaming Blue Murder was 82.
Yeah, I think Screaming was the last one with the original lineup.
Was it Running Wild?
That's the one, yeah.
Okay.
That was out in 85, right in the hair metal era.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not even hair metal. It's horrendous. But again, they're still going. I mean, Tracy Lamb has rejoined the band for about the 4th time. I saw them recently supporting. They were playing with Alcatraz, and
okay.
It was a good show. I've seen them support Saxon recently, so they're still doing the circuit. And they're good, fun band to see live.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and yeah, the classic albums they're that's a good way to describe them. They're very fun albums to listen to.
See this one? This is Japanese release, I believe.
Very cool.
It kind of looks like it's going to be a picture disc, but it's not. It's just actually a very big label.
Oh, weird. That's fucking weird. I've never seen one of those.
That is goofy, but
That's
neat.
Cool. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the Japanese.
Nice.
Very cool.
It's live tracks.
Yep. And yeah, if
also, please don't touch on it. The Motorhead and Girl School version.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And the just for if folks aren't, I'm trying to make sure I get this right. Double checking. Yeah, the original. Okay, maybe not the original lineup, but the classic lineup has Denise Dufert in it. She's still in it. Is she still in? Okay. Yeah, because she's her brother was Angel Witch in Angel Witch, if I'm remembering right. Hopefully, I'm not mangling that. So, yeah, kind of cool that there was a connection between the two bands there.
Okay, Andy, you're up.
Right. Well, you mentioned still with the Motorhead link, and you did mention Warfare, and I'd already grabbed a Warfare again. Another band that had very, very sort of punky influences early on. Neat Records, again northeast of England. And obviously the Venom links here are and the Motorhead links because it's produced by Algie Ward of Tank, and the last track we have I don't suppose you could really call it a duet, but we have Warfare and Venom both working together on Rose Petals Fall from the Face, a beautiful collaboration of the metal world. But again, Warfare, one of these bands that they're raw, they're Motorhead on amphetamine, they're sloppy like Venom, very punky as well, and they've got 2 or 3 pretty good albums out. And again, these have all been reissued recently on Back on Black, and they're pretty cheap to pick up. But Warfare, I think, are definitely a good example of your punky influence UK thrash band that never really, didn't really make the grade. But there's so many of these bands that didn't make the grade, but 30 years later, I just love listening to.
Yeah. Good shit. All right, Alan.
Let's see. Okay, well, nobody's actually pulled the trigger on this one, but we've danced around it, so we might as well mention Motorhead. And again, like Marty said, we've done the deep dive on Motorhead before. We don't need to do their whole history, but Motorhead very early on kind of carved out their own niche, and while they never really wanted to be called heavy metal themselves, it's undeniable that's the genre they had the biggest impact on.
Yeah.
They were never a commercial rock band, which of course is fine. But they have influenced a ton of bands. We've been shown some examples of those. And it's a little funny. I always think of Motorhead as being a little bit more, predating new wave of British heavy metal, but they really don't buy much. There's the first album, the whole On Parole situation and such. But really, Motorhead's cranking out albums 2 and 3, depending on how you count. Right there in 1979. So they're very much in the thick of it. When you look at a lot of the old flyers and posters from concerts during the new wave of British heavy metal, Motorhead's plastered all over those. They were always a part of a lot of those shows and festivals and such. So yeah, they really were. They were much more a part of the new wave of British heavy metal as a relatively new band at the time, compared to say Judas Priest, who had been at it for years and had a bunch of albums out, and then were also swept up in an influence in those bands. But Motorhead was hitting it at the time. There's no need to go real deep on Motorhead, but you can't mention big UK metal in terms of icons or influence without bringing them up.
No, yeah,
and it's funny. Some of the bands we've talked about tonight, that have had these similar long careers where they have their ups and downs, but they've always been very consistent, very solid output for the most part. Have a very dedicated fan base, like the Saxons of the world. They don't sound like Motorhead, but they kind of followed a similar career trajectory, just never got quite as big. But Motorhead, they found their lane, and it did well by them, even if they didn't have quite the same levels of success maybe as a Priest or Maiden. They're definitely in that pantheon of bands that have influenced so many others and had so many bands follow up with them. That we got to at least mention them here in passing.
Yeah, agreed.
Well, the influence you mentioned there, Saxon. I mean, on Thunderbolt, they had the songs that they played rock and roll as a tribute to Motorhead for the the influence that they'd had as well.
Yep. Yeah, I like that era of Motorhead too. Rock and Roll's a cool album.
But
it has a couple of. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Lemmy also said that these they've got more in common with bands like The Damned than Black Sabbath, and they've got absolutely nothing in common with Judas Priest.
No.
Yeah. I've noticed, musicians, no matter what you call their band, they all seem to bristle and it's like, oh, we don't put us in that category, man. I think it's required to be a musician that you must resist being labeled. Lemmy can call it rock and roll, I guess, or whatever he wanted to, but his fan base and his legacy is in heavy metal, whether he wants to call the band heavy metal or not.
Do you think it's not because a lot of people maybe discount the 70s as being heavy metal, even though it was, and they were Motorhead were around before the new wave of British heavy metal, and a lot of people kind of say that when they say heavy metal, they're thinking Iron Maiden, they're thinking Judas Priest, thinking bands that age, but they were around first, and to call them heavy metal is kind of making it sound like they were around at the same time, whereas they were a bit before. Yeah. I always wondered whether it was a case of disassociation just by saying, we were here first, we were rock and roll. We're
maybe. Yeah, I'm not really sure what it is. I mean, because Lemmy, Lemmy was around before any heavy metal. In his day, he's a roadie for Hendrix in the 60s. Yeah. He plays, in a few, small bands, that have a much more, like
rocking Vickers.
Heavy, psych, bent to them. So, he saw the rise of 70s heavy metal with Zeppelin and Sabbath and Purple, and saw the rise of the punk scene, and saw the kind of reformation of heavy metal at the end of the 70s. Maybe it's just a fact that he's just like, I predate all that shit. I'm not going to consider myself part of that, which was his prerogative if that's the way he wanted to do it. I don't think it hurt his career any. Folks loved him, no matter what it was. So, but yeah, I'm not exactly sure what his rationale was for always wanting to resist that tag, despite the fact that those were always the festivals and the fans and the tours, that he was on with. It was always heavy metal bands.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure he never opened for Blink, 182 or Adam Levine or any of these guys.
All right. I'm up. I'm going to roll through a few of these. I know we're going a little long here, and Andy, I'm
Yeah.
sure would love to go to bed at this point.
It's time to start wrapping things up for the evening. So, yep, show them if you got them.
I've got, as far as industrial and started to seep into metal a little bit, and you've got Pitch Shifter. I'm a big fan of the first 3 Pitch Shifter albums. I've shown this album several times on this channel for sure. This is an EP, Pitch Shifter Submit. The first album, Industrial, is a full length. Their third album, Desensitize, it's industrialized metal. I think it is better than Godflesh. It's more crusty. It comes from more of a crusty hardcore place, I think. Excellent stuff. I'm a huge fan of English punk. Always have been. My favorite band from England as far as punk goes. I like the Subhumans a lot, but GBH is definitely my favorite. Leather Bristles, No Survivors, and Sick Boys is a reissue on Earmark. And this album, they start to get a little bit more metal, Midnight Madness and beyond. As this band went on, they started to get more metal. It's still really well-written punk, very good stuff. Another band initially came from Scotland. Got the Exploited, Troops of Tomorrow, and Let's Start a War.
Singer for Exploited. I've forgotten his name now because it's late.
Waddy.
Yeah, he drinks in the bar that I go and see most of my bands in. So still see him around.
Right on. He's had multiple heart attacks. He should not be in there fucking drinking. But anyway.
I don't know what he's drinking. He's just in there.
But this is just fucking really pissed off English punk. I love it. It's super crass. It's super I don't know if they call this UK 82 punk. I have no idea. But this shit's great. I love it. It's just great English punk. Bolt Thrower and Battle, There Is No Law. I should have showed this earlier. I got mixed up. But after I should have showed this after Sacrilege, but you can't go through this without showing Bolt Thrower or Carcass. And I've got a few more. I'll wait and do it on my next round. It'll be my last round. So yeah. Andy,
I'll go in with if this is the last round, I'll go with 2 for these 2 albums came to me at about the same time. I'm still going to go back to traditional heavy metal. I mean, that's kind of my thing with thrash, and obviously thrash isn't that big within the UK, but these 2 hit me both at the same time. Wildcat by Tigers of Pangtang and Demon. They were both before my time in terms of me getting into music. So I discovered them kind of later on. But the first time I got Demon as a blind buy, I looked at that cover and thought, that's got to be some nasty thrash shit going on here.
No,
and, I didn't look at the date at the back because it's black on it's purple on black and it's difficult to read. I didn't read the fact that it was like 1980 and thrash didn't exist. So when I took it home and played it, and it was the intro is gnarly and evil, and it builds up an atmosphere and it goes on, and then it goes into the songs, and the songs are just straight up new wave British heavy metal.
Yeah.
They're lovely metal songs. But these 2 albums for me are Sunday morning, stick them on, making pancakes for the kids, making their breakfast, and I can put these on back to back, either order. And I love the first Tigers of Pangtang Wildcat. For me, this band they didn't get any better progressively with each album. I'm not going to say that worse, because the 2 after this, what Spellbound and Crazy Nights, they were okay. Jess Cox had left. I loved his vocals. Then they have the likes of the Cage and Spell and the Wreckage, which are horrendous. I mean, any metal band that does a cover of Love Potion No. 9 doesn't deserve any success at all. But Demon went a really strange way, and they went I think they went a bit proggy and a bit weird, but I still kind of liked it because I like those early albums so much. Tigers of Pangtang completely lost their way. Even Rob Weir left, and he was the founding member. They were still doing albums, but Tigers of Pangtang are back. Their last album, Ritual, is fantastic. That's a really good album. And they're touring, and they're producing stuff again, fairly small clubs, but they're kind of keeping their legacy alive, and they're doing a good job with it. They've got a good vocalist in there.
The only Demon I've heard is that The one that has "Don't Break the Circle" on. I want to say "Unexpected Guest." I want to say
The blue cover, yeah.
I didn't care for it. Didn't care for it. It wasn't something I was into. I might like it more now, but
I like this. I do like this one a lot, but the first album for me is just it's one of those albums that, you know, I could just put on at any time. I say it's Sunday morning music for me. It's chill out metal. No, that doesn't work. But
yeah. I like the two Demon albums. I feel like they both have some really killer songs, but they also have a few fillers. So if I kind of take like half of each album, splice them together, and I get one really, really good Demon album out of them combined.
I'll buy that.
All right, Alan.
Okay. Mention a few things here as we're wrapping up. I've been told Thin Lizzy doesn't quite count, being an Irish band, and this is a UK show. There's at least tenuous connections with some members maybe being from outside Ireland. They at least I'm going to mention just in passing again because we've touched on a lot of the other classic 70s hard rock heavy metal bands. And Thin Lizzy, along with UFO, is another one of those acts that every single new wave of British heavy metal band would cite as a major influence when they got interviewed back in the early 1980s. The twin guitar styles, the just very kind of straightforward street level mentality of the lyrics and such, that it's not art rock like Queen. It's not got the falsetto vocals of Judas Priest. It's just really straightforward, good heavy rock music with guitar heroics all over the place. It was a huge influence on the movement, so I want to shout them out. I'm going to mention these guys real quickly. I know Marty's not a fan. I'm not a huge fan either. Led Zeppelin's impact, though, on heavy metal, and just in terms of influencing bands to want to go make heavy music, people hearing Jimmy Page and wanting to sit down and learn how to play Black Dog or whatever other song caught their ear. Led Zeppelin had a massive impact on heavy music, and they were an extremely successful band at it. Personally, not a huge fan. I can kind of splice together a greatest hits of Led Zeppelin and be pretty happy with it, but yeah, they have their heavy moments, especially with some of the tracks like on the second album, where they're Whole Lot of Love. I was talking to someone in the comments at the start of things tonight. You can put a Whole Lot of Love on up against anything Black Sabbath did, like around the Paranoid era, and it's just as heavy and just as good. But a lot of Zeppelin stuff obviously isn't. They drawn a lot. No, you go back and listen to a Whole Lot of Love.
I don't need to listen to that ever again.
that track is monstrously heavy. It's got a huge primal thud to it, absolutely. But yes, a lot of their stuff doesn't work, and they're another example that they were very much kind of the definition of dinosaur rock by the time you got to the 1980s. They didn't even make the transition into the 80s really. Last one I'll shout out. This band had no real impact at the time, but they did sort of get a following later on, and later would get cited by a lot of bands as being an influence, which I always found strange because, this band came and went and apparently weren't all that well regarded at the time. It's Witchfinder General. Very unusual for a new wave of British heavy metal band. They very much were doing the Black Sabbath vibe. And again, Black Sabbath in the early 80s, they had the revival with Ronnie James Dio, but the older stuff was, again, it was kind of the dinosaur rock sound. Bands had listened to Black Sabbath, they liked parts of it, but you didn't have a lot of new wave of British heavy metal bands trying to sound anything like Black Sabbath, really. But Witchfinder General was one that really took that aesthetic, and they really ran with it. Different color vinyl for this one.
Here we go. Everybody take 20 minutes. Here we go.
Clear vinyl for that one.
Hipster
What's this one? Oh, this one's got the naughty inner sleeve. I think that's red vinyl. Ooh la la. But yeah, they came with. They did get 2 albums out from the heavy metal label. This is the second one. This is also the second one on the picture disc. This is also the second one on black vinyl, maybe.
Oh.
This is also the second one. This is clear vinyl. This is what happens to some clear vinyl pressings with age is they will oxidize a bit and get really, really dark. When I bought this album 30 years ago, it was clear vinyl.
Wow.
This is the second album too. They put it on silver mirrored vinyl, but didn't put it in a cover because they wanted people to be able to like see the fancy shiny mirror vinyl.
See your face in it.
Ooh, wow. When I got it at first, I was like, why is there no fucking cover with this? And I looked into it, was like, no, it actually came without a cover. Anyway, they made the two albums. They weren't taken very seriously. This was not a Tigers of Pantang or a Diamond Head. These guys did not go on to anything. And then about 20 years later, you started seeing Witchfinder General's name pop up a lot. A lot of it, I noticed when it started happening with Reverend Bizarre, and you've got the picture of, is it Albert wearing the Witchfinder General T-shirt on one of the early photo shoots. And then all of a sudden, it's like every other band was name dropping Witchfinder General. It's like, oh yeah, I love those guys. Sometimes some little part of my brain has been a little cynical and wonders like, did you really hear that band 20 years ago? Or did you just go out and listen to them because you saw them on a Reverend Bizarre album and now you're going to kind of, bow at the altar? I don't know. But they get cited as, an influence in the doom scene, even though they weren't a long-running or prolific band. I like both the albums quite a bit. I don't just buy these things to have them. I really do enjoy the two albums. I think there are lots of fun stuff on them. But yeah, maybe you take it with a grain of salt, but they have been cited, and maybe just by fact of being one of the only bands at the time that followed closely the Black Sabbath footprint. They did have an impact on some bands later on when doom kind of got a second wind early in the 2000s.
Bit Bob Boom says Witchfinder General and Pagan Altar both influential after the fact, and that's true.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Pagan Altar didn't even release anything in the early 1980s. They recorded a bunch of stuff, but there was no output. Maybe demo cassette only things, but there was no Pagan Altar vinyl or CD until later in the 80s, and it was bootlegs. And then the band got attention, and folks went back and they did some excellent stuff. But there's no Pagan Altar release from 1980 or 1982. So that's where I'll call it for the night. We'll wrap up with Witchfinder General there. So Marty, what's you said you got one or two more?
I got a few more. I'm gonna roll through a couple death metal things and end on a black metal and some power metal. Death metal, Benediction. This is by far my favorite Benediction album, Transcend the Rubicon. Their best riff album. Their new album, Spheres, I want to say. I don't remember. It's good. It's really good. It's just not as good as this. They've been a band that really didn't excite me like other bands out there. Another death metal band from England, Necrosanct with Incarnate. These guys are very crusty sounding, very average, but it's still they've got a very crusty English tone to them. I like this album. Black metal. I was a part of this. I released their first album, this album, Loss. People say they're racist. They're not racist. Drop it. They're not racist. Absolutely killer. It was like the modern era, a modern band take on the old Emperor sound. This album Loss is fantastic. If you're into black metal, check it out. And power metal, I got two bands to show. This one here I shouldn't show because they've proven to be kind of assholes. And I think they're Scottish, but Glory Hammer, my kid loves this album. He loves this album. This album is so fucking cheesy. It makes you want to puke in your mouth because it is so fucking cheesy, but my kid loves it and it is so catchy. It's infectious. Again, they ended up being not very nice about women and some minorities. So fuck them for that. Also, it goes with the guy from Ailstorm. And another band I want to show that I think is no longer, but I enjoy quite a bit. They're a newer band, Sellsword with Unto the Breach.
Oh yeah, very good band.
This is a very good band. A singer that sounds a lot like Messiah. It's kind of in the epic metal sphere. this album, they put out 2 albums. This is their latest, and I think their final. I would love to put this shit out on vinyl, but I don't know how well it would do as a binder release. But this is really great stuff. If you're into epic metal, definitely check them out. They're on Bandcamp. Sellsword, SELLSWORD. I want to try to get a little bit of everything from everyone in here, but all genres.
Yeah, the Sellsword albums on Bandcamp, just so folks know, they're a little expensive. I want to say the download price was like $10, $12, which for me personally, that's where I start getting a little bit like, I don't know about that for a digital copy. That one's worth it. That one is definitely worth the few extra bucks. Go check it out for sure. Yeah, I've seen some people sell CD pressings of it, but it definitely reeks of being like Russian bootleg kind of thing. I'm really not sure there's any legit CD pressing to be had.
All right. Did you have more, Andy? Or are you done?
I'm done. I'm good.
Okay.
I ended up showing more than I pulled anyway. So.
Well, let's be honest. It is impossible in a couple hours to hit all of the sweet spots in the English metal world because it's vast and there's a lot of great bands. I mean, we didn't even mention Paradise Lost. We didn't even mention Anathema.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't mention Tiger Tails.
We didn't mention Deep Purple as another big 70s.
Deep Purple. I mean, Black Sabbath in passing, but like I said, we some of these bigger bands we've covered a bunch on this channel. But England is a very important part in the metal pantheon. Of course, it's influenced many other artists the world over. And Andy, it's been a pleasure having you on finally, and we will have you on again, sir, if you if it's a mission you choose to accept.
It's been great. No, I've thanks very much for asking me to come on. Say sorry it took so long to get around to it, but we got there in the end. This was a really fun topic because I had a good think about it today. But even as you guys were mentioning bands, I was reaching over and just grabbing more stuff that I hadn't even thought of that was just obvious that had to be shown. So,
right?
Yeah. There's so much we can do this over and over again for sure, and maybe we will.
But hang on, do not hang up, Andy. We're going to talk for a second afterwards. And everybody, thank you for jumping on with us, being flexible. We were a little early tonight to accommodate the time zone differences. And I do want to say one final thing before we close. Fuck tyranny, fuck Vladimir Putin, and fuck war. I can't believe in this day and age we are still having to put up with this stupid shit when people are just trying to get through the day and survive and raise their kids and make money and just get through the day. You have to put up with bullshit. It's insane. Fuck tyranny. And we love you all. We've got a thing coming up on a Wednesday. I don't know if it'll be this Wednesday or the next Wednesday. Kind of a new little thing we're going to do. Little fun little thing. It'll be on a Wednesday, so it'll be a shorter stream. But before we close, I want to say definitely go check out Cloudy Milder on YouTube, and also check out Contact in Blood. It is Cloudy Milder along with Metal Mickey, Mark G with a C, and the Rock Scout all get together. They do a little they do a live stream like this here. They have topics every so often. They're not as regular as we are, but they are just as awesome. And they appeal to the European crowd for sure. Maybe, I don't know, the world, I don't know, doesn't matter. They're awesome. Check them out. And awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. We appreciate it. We will see you soon. Anybody have anything to add before I jump?
12 hours of Pokemon tomorrow, folks. Get ready for it. Pro Tour Church. I'm doomed.
Good luck, Alan.
I'm going to need it.
Cheers. We're jumping. See y'all later.
Everybody have a good weekend.
Cheers.